Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to the Tuesday, January the 4th, 2022. Let's get used to that year right now. So hopefully some of the things that happened last year will be bygones. So with Roanoke County work session and also reorganization meeting. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I will now turn it over to Dr. Nicely.
Yes, sir. We'll conduct the election for chairman, and so at this time, we'll ask for nominations.
I would like to nominate David Linden for chairman.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Abstain.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Linden. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Promise not to embarrass you too much.
I appreciate that.
I am sitting next to him, so.
Yeah, I've got my
Yep, I can't
protector
help you.
over here now. All right. Now that that is over, I'd like to ask for nominations for vice chair.
Mr. Chairman. Oh, I better not. Anybody else?
Sure, it's fine.
Cheryl?
I would like to nominate Brent Hudson for vice chair, please.
Second.
Second. Do we have any other nominations? Madam Clerk, the roll.
I abstain.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And now I believe it's back to you, Ken, based on what I see here.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to recommend that the board name Angela Roberson as the clerk of the board. I don't know if you want to do this as one vote or two, but I'll just go ahead and throw in and Ms. Cindy Purdue as deputy clerk.
Second.
Madam Clerk, the roll. He made a motion.
I made a recommendation. So
Oh,
y'all have to elect me.
recommendation.
I'll make a motion to
Yeah.
accept
Second.
the clerk and deputy clerk as stated in Dr. Nicely's statement.
Okay. I have a motion and a second by Mr. Greenway. Now, Madam Clerk, the roll.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Item number 2.02, establishment of meeting dates, places, and times. Do we have that on? There we go.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
are we talking about changing January 13th to the 18th?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to move the January 13th, January 13th meeting to Tuesday, January 18th. We already have a joint meeting with the Board of Supervisors on the 11th that week, which, based on my conversations with them, may be upwards of 2 to 3 hours, and thought that if we could move that January 13th meeting to the 18th, if that was acceptable to everybody. Other than that, I did not see any changes on the meeting agenda as proposed.
I'm good with
And the joint meeting, 5 o'clock?
Yes, sir. 5 o'clock, and they're going to have it found out today in their boardroom on
In the
Tuesday.
boardroom, okay. And so I second the motion of,
Oh.
you did make a motion,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Okay, Madam Clerk, the roll.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
that. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Item 3, recess. I don't believe we need that.
That was just so you could change chairs, so you're good.
Gotcha. And now on to the agenda. I would like to see if there are any objections to moving item 4.01 to item 4.06 so that we can get additional information or have additional information that may come before that. Any objections?
No.
All right. Then we will get on to item 4.02, Mr. Grimes, project updates.
Mr. Chairman, wasn't quite sure if Mr. Lowe would be back with us by this date, but glad to announce that he is, so he'll be joining Mr. Grimes there.
Very good.
Well, Happy New Year. It's good to see all of you again. And I'm also glad to have Chris Lowe with us. And so we're going to be addressing some project updates. And I'm actually going to yield the floor to Mr. Lowe to handle the first two items. And although this is not an all-inclusive list, but it does hit a lot of the highlights of what has been transpiring since the last board meeting.
So I was going to talk to you about the athletic fields that Mr. Jordan is doing at some of our baseball fields within the county school system. At Northside High School, he's completed raising home plate up 4 inches. The mound has been completely redone. He is now sodding around home plate, and he still needs to grade the infield dirt. He says he has 1 to 1.5 days to finish. Last week he had his entire crew down with COVID, so he was unable to be on the property at that time. So he is hoping that once this weather breaks, he will get back out there and move from Northside to Byrd and do the same work he has to do at Byrd that he did at Northside. Hidden Valley High School soccer, he's still waiting for the turf blankets. He had ordered the turf blankets. They came in, and Roanoke City picked them up and bought them from Landscape Supply. Landscape Supply raised the price from $175 a blanket to $285 a blanket. So there's a little bit of an issue there with the cost. Glenboro High School, he's complete there. The administration over there did ask him to edge the infield at their cost, and he has not done that yet, but he does plan on doing that before the season. And like I said, at William Byrd, he still has 2 loads of infield mix to add and grade into and then grade the dirt on the third base side to create those low spots, to remove those low spots.
So essentially you haven't started at Byrd, right?
At Byrd, he's done all the aeration, all the herbicides, all the fertilizations.
Well, that's what they normally do, right? So,
right, yes, sir.
And I guess to Northside's point, that starts in what, 45 days?
Yes,
Baseball?
sir. That's about right, yes, sir. Mid-February.
Man, we are running out of time for these kids.
Well,
And the soccer blankets, they haven't got those down, which would have been prime growing season, I would think, with all the heat we've had.
Yeah.
So they're not down either.
The one good thing at Hidden Valley High soccer field is that the field germinated, and you can go out and you can actually see that it is green. The grass has been growing here recently because of the warm weather that we had. Now, of course, it's going to slow down now.
My understanding is if it freezes now, it could kill it though, unless it's Bermuda.
It's not Bermuda.
So it could, yeah. Does he need, I just don't understand. I don't get the delay. I'm sorry. I know it was, last 2 weeks were holidays, but who's doing this?
This is Rock Haven Sports, Scaping, I guess is the name. Rock Haven Sports. Anyway, he does all most of the fields for Roanoke City, and he's doing these fields for us.
Is he putting city in front of us, or I just
No,
don't
he just,
understand.
like I said, his entire crew had COVID, and they shut down for about 10 days, he said.
Over the last 2 weeks?
Yes.
Which, that's the holidays anyway, but
Right.
we shouldn't even be at this point, Chris. That's my only thing. Anyway, I'll let it go, but
Mr. Ray?
What is the germination period for that?
For the rye is about 7 days. And the
7
rye is actually pretty high over at Hidden Valley High School soccer right now. Your bluegrass is a little bit longer than that, probably more like 2 weeks.
And do you do anything else to the rye other than cut it?
No, sir. No, sir.
Fertilize
It'll
it.
grow with the bluegrass mix.
Okay.
Okay.
I've been out and seen some of the work they do, and I'm very impressed with when they do get some work done, the work that is done, but
Quality
getting that
work when
work
he's there.
started is the issue that I see.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I have no problem with the quality, it's just getting them to work. And let me ask, why, since you bring it, the north side deal, are we not addressing the outfield on that one?
No, sir, we're not
Okay.
taking the outfield down or raising the outfield up, no, sir.
At some point, I can't believe we haven't addressed that in the last, again, I know this is a huge issue, but over 30 years, and if you had a kid playing on it, I would think it would be. But,
How big,
Mr. Wright?
how big a slope is it in the outfield?
2%,
2%?
yes, sir. It's 2% from center field to home plate.
And how does that compare with the other fields? Does it have any?
Pretty, it's pretty typical for an athletic field to run 1 to 1.5%. 2%'s more of a lawn type runoff, grading for a subdivision or something like that. It's because it does have a little bit of rise to it from one end to the other. I think it's about 7.5 to 8 feet at north side from home plate to center field over a course of 400 some feet.
yeah.
So that's about the right math, I believe.
I mean, that's not something you were.
Once you get less than 2%, you end up having ponding and water not running off. It just kind of settles in the low spots and stays there and doesn't have anywhere to go. And some are graded differently. Some are peaked, different directions, and it sheds the water off different directions as well. This one doesn't do that at north side.
Sheds it right back to the
It
infield.
just runs everything back towards the infield and then around the backs of the infield to the sides.
Speaking of Northside, are we any closer on that tennis court thing we spoke about?
Well, we have reached out to the contractor. He will not return my calls. I believe Chris has reached out to him, and he's not returning any calls. And I believe, Dr. Nicely, you tried, attempted to call, and he took your call because he didn't recognize the number. It was our supposition. But at this point, he's still waiting until more of the spring thaw to do any additional work. Is what we're getting.
Just in my conversation with him, and again, I think he took my call because he didn't recognize the number. This is right before Christmas. It sounds like to me, I think it's a situation in which, he literally, it sounds like, books these things out like a year ahead of time. And he had us down to do this 2 years ago when COVID hit, and we had the money to do it. That's when he kind of locked it in, and then when we had to kind of pull the rug out from under him, so to speak, because we decided, the board decided, look, it's probably not a good time, not know what the economic situation was going to be. Should we be out doing these tennis courts right now? So we put it off. And I'm just speculating. I think he's kind of working us back in, but making promises we're not keeping.
Are we bound by him?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, that's a conversation, that we've had. And you all know this. Typically in these contracts, and I'm probably saying it wrong, but you don't put in like a performance kind of thing. You can do that, it jacks your price up, but at some point, as frustrating as this is, with these
If you
different
don't get it
projects-
done, what's the matter? What the cost is?
Right. So I think that's a conversation we might want to have in the future. Is that something we want to look at? Just so we have something hanging over somebody's head to say, look,
So he can take as long as he wants. We've got a couple
how-
years.
how they're written.
Well, the contract that I have read, and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, states that it has to be done before the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30. Now, that does not help us as far as the spring game activities go on with the tennis courts.
Because that too starts in 45 days.
And that was the whole issue. That's why we started this 7 or 8 months ago.
Is it resurfacing? Is that what they're doing? Or is it complete
Well,
overhaul?
at Northside High
Northside, it's
School,
rebuilt.
they've got they've had 4 courts there on their property, but they've literally not used them. How long, David? Like probably 20-some years, or not, probably since I was in high school.
Jason said he didn't play on them.
They,
or
they,
that's-
because
in 90s.
Northside had those, there was like 10 courts, you know, it used to be nice over at Walden Park, and so they used to go over there and play, that's where they still go. And there's still 5 courts out there that are in pretty good shape, you know, there's about, at least 2 that are pretty bad, but anyway, so the board decided, hey, let's go ahead and put Northside on par with everybody else, and so they were gonna, you know, tear out those courts and build new
complete
there.
rebuild.
Right, but then at Bird, Glenver, and Cave Spring, we were, what's the proper term?
Resurface.
Resurface, that's what I
Resurface.
asked you.
Yeah.
With lights. That's-
Right, putting lights in at the other schools, right?
And so how many courts were they gonna do, rebuild,
4.
4, yeah,
and that's why you need the lights?
right,
ma'am.
yeah.
So do you have an option to go elsewhere? Or are we locked into this contract at this point? Should we look elsewhere?
Well, we could, but we would be liable for any materials and things like that that he would have purchased or time. So we would have to fulfill some part of that contract and then notify him that we would want to be out of that contract or cancel the contract, and then we would have to go through the whole purchasing process again. It's like what Mr. Greenway said, you know, we started this about 7 months ago, back in July. We got the money in July, went through the purchasing process for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then the PO process for another week or so. And then we waited on AP for about 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And then, you know, then we've been waiting on him since to do what he's done. And what he's done so far is he's got the, you know, he did the demo, and then he's got the base down ready for the paving. But the paver, his subcontractor paver, which is not Adams, they're providing the asphalt. It's another paving company, had other work lined up all the way up through last week. And they did all the other work before they even thought about coming to us.
Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any other any contracts that have any penalty?
The only one I remember since I've been here, which has been a little while now, is at Glenver High School. We had a liquidated damages clause in that contract for the kitchen, that the kitchen had to be ready by that fall school year, because of course the kitchen fed the middle school and the high school. So the contractor was responsible. If they did not have that kitchen ready by the first day of school, it was a $1,000 a day penalty. They did have it ready by the first day of school.
And that penalty was based on what it would cost to provide those services elsewhere, and something that could be quantified. You know, to try to put liquidated damages on a project, you really have to have a legitimate cost as to what it would be to provide that through another avenue. And, you know, part of our discussion with Dr. Nicely is, you know, the courts haven't been used really for competition in a very long time, so how would we really be able to come up with a number?
Well, if you
for
had to
those.
go rent somewhere and say, I had to go rent a facility that was comparable to what we
Right.
want to do.
Right.
then
Right,
to
that
me,
would
that's-
provide the
that's
number for
damage.
that, yes.
Or, you know, that would be something. I just
I
don't
think we
we
ought to
ever-
have our attorney look at something like that and say, you know, I mean, it's ridiculous. If he's holding out, you know, to work us in, and then what assurances are we gonna have? What kind of job are we gonna have when he tries to cram us in the last month of the, you know, the time frame he has? You know, I mean, does Roanoke County look at our contracts, procurement contracts?
Yes, sir. They run through their purchasing department.
And they're okay with these?
Yes. If not, they do let us know.
The same company who redid the courts at Hidden Valley,
Yes,
correct?
sir. Same-
And we've used in the past.
Yes.
What's his name, God?
Yeah, it's another one of those, they do good work when you can get them, right? It's a matter of just, I mean, you know.
Have we let the administration at Northside know that they're not gonna have tennis courts for the year?
Well, I will talk to Jill this week. I don't think she's aware of it yet.
Well,
Because
she-
they will need to make some
in
other
my
arrangements.
travels over there, she has asked me, where are we with this?
She probably
She has
did.
not seen them performing any activities down there.
Yeah. I think the reality is, like you said, that they need to plan for, you know, Walren probably.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a call into Mr. Bowers over at Time Technology today to find out about the status of the Bogo Field sign, but I haven't heard back from him yet. But I'm assuming we're probably talking that the sign should be arriving sometime this month, based on his initial proposal of about eight weeks. So we should be receiving that sign sometime here in January and getting it installed by the spring sports season over there for soccer at Bogle.
Okay. As part of the budget, the board had approved some playground components to be replaced at the value of $100,000. And so Back Creek playground component was replaced, that it has been inspected, the children are playing on it, so that job is complete. Also at Back Creek, we have a boiler replacement valued at $115,000 that is in design. And then moving to Burlington Elementary, that was the second playground component, because we had 2 years worth of playground components that had been approved, and going back to COVID, things were put on hold. So we did 2 playground components valued at $100,000, and that is complete at Burlington. And then at Burlington Elementary, we had a fire alarm control panel replacement, which has been installed over the holidays, and we're just now awaiting the final code review from the county. And the same occurred at Clearbrook Elementary, that again, we're awaiting the codes department to do their final approval. We did a functional test at each location so that we know that it works, but the codes have to come in and just put their seal of approval on it.
Does it, excuse me, the fire alarms, are they working?
Yes, they're working.
That does not affect occupancy.
It does not affect occupancy, it's just for them to go in and just ensure that everything was done according to what they believe it should be.
So they're operational?
Correct. They are operational. And the reason we replaced those was because those 2 panels were at end of life. We could not get repair parts or replacement parts for them. So moving ahead to Hidden Valley Middle, we have a $235,000 cooling tower replacement that the design is complete, and we will be going out to bids for that work. And we've discussed the Northside High School tennis courts. At Northside High School, we also had guidance and E-Hall HVAC replacement valued at $277,000. That minor work is in progress to get that moving toward the replacement piece of the equipment. And then at Northside Middle School, we have our domestic water line connection that the bids that came in, or the bid that came in, we only had one when we had to go to the sealed bid process, was $70,000. I'm sorry, the initial bid was $70,000 for the total work, and it came back being $50,000 over the construction and installation. So at this point, and I believe Dr. Nicely spoke with some of the board members so we could get this moving ahead. The issue that we have is that the water quality is not where the health department says it should be. And although it's still drinkable, it is continuing to get worse, and we are doing sampling with the health department so that they can monitor what's going on. Now at this point, as we have on the slide, that there were 3 items that really affected this. 2 were from the water authority's requirements that were not brought to our attention initially when we came to you for funding, which was the not being able to bore, we have to use an open trench. And then the second was using ductile pipe instead of PVC with a tracer wire. And then the third item, as I said, was the single response that was $50,000 over the initial quote when we found out our quotes were over $50,000. And then to follow the process, we had to go back to a sealed bid.
Why would they not let you bore?
Because when you bore and having to have the metal pipe, the process doesn't work. With the PVC pipe, you can connect it together and keep feeding it through. But with the metal ductile pipe, it has connections that have to be fitted together at the connection.
I mean, I know one of the contractors that works for Western Virginia, and he bores all the time. I don't understand why they wouldn't let you do that.
Well, that was what the Water Authority told our design firm.
I mean, he puts in subdivisions. But,
Do you think there's a difference for commercial use and residential use?
Possibly.
could be.
And it would have to be traffic rated because of the asphalt area that is traversing.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't think that would, be different, commercial to residential, but there may be something I don't know about commercial.
So we,
Just to reiterate that number 3 part about the procurement process, this is one of those examples where the procurement process, should be designed to save taxpayer money, wound up working against, because the three initial quotes that they got, the lowest one was much lower.
correct.
But because they tripped that $50,000 threshold, they had to put it out to sealed bid, which then of
Correct.
course took another 2 weeks, and they only got 1 sealed bid back. And that was for Fallon. So that's an
Right.
example where the procurement process did not save money.
Did the initial bids completely understand the scope of the project?
Yes, we were working with 95% drawings, which the additional 5% had nothing to do with the materials or the, or qualifications. It was just some final documents that the state would require. And so we gave them that information, and now what came back in the sealed bid was the same dollar amount that the submitter had given us on the first round. And of course, not really knowing that the two would decide not to give us a sealed bid, really hurt us.
And you have to accept that third one, I guess.
Yes,
There's not a,
He was the only
he was the only one
person.
that bid.
right, but there's not
In
an
order to
option
do the project at
Yes.
this point.
you could go back and rebid it, I guess, but that probably wouldn't yield anything different.
At this point, we may not get a bidder
Right,
if we try to do that.
yeah, I see that.
It was already approved though last.
Yeah, so based on the consensus that we had, we went ahead and awarded the contract, so he can go ahead and start ordering whatever, you gotta order a vault or something?
We had to order the vault, which is the first item, so that the water authority can install the meter. And then from there, the contractor can install the line and bring it to the building.
And we gotta get it fixed either way, I mean, that's the
That's
bottom
it.
line,
Yeah.
Correct. Any further questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So going forward in the future, how can you prevent this from happening again, knowing what you know now?
Well, we can use the historical information that we've received from this project to include the cost for moving forward, saying, okay, for example, we know how many linear feet it was, we know what the cost was per linear foot, we can apply that toward any future projects. And then also recognizing the time frame that it took for us to get the design. That hurt us as well, not so much from a monetary standpoint, but as far as a duration time frame. So those are some items that we can keep in our toolkit, so moving forward that we can, on the front end, ask for the amount and not have to come back a second time.
Right.
How many schools do we have left that are not on domestic water?
Mason's Cove and Back Creek.
Okay.
Well, we have partial at Glenver Middle.
Which we're changing out to domestic.
Right. Okay. Any further questions? All right, the last one that I have on the list is the William Byrd High School. The completion date that we have now is August of '23. And again, lead times have been the factors that have pushed that date out. Wood doors are expected to ship January the 10th. The boilers that arrived the week of December the 27th for spring break 22 connection. And the storefront glass and frames will install spring break of 22. And the furniture that was ordered, what, 7 months ago, Chris? All of it arrived on time.
Oh,
It's all sitting at the school or in our warehouse.
So,
When do they go from, I can't remember the phases, but when do they jump from where they're, in the rear to what I call the front now?
well, they have had to jump around just to keep the crews that they have busy. So they've worked with the administration to involve those crews to address other phases. So right now, they've not gone sequentially from phase 1 to phase 2 or phase 3.
But as far as switching out, like the ones who are currently in the mobile units,
Right.
that, we're still waiting on which pieces for that, because
The
the frames came in, right?
But the frames came in, the doors are a big hurdle for them to overcome, because they can't secure the classrooms.
Okay.
So once the doors arrive, then they can secure those classrooms, and then start transitioning students from the mobile class, the learning cottages, to the inside classrooms.
Yeah, saying trailers in Vinton's not, that doesn't, yeah.
I know.
But the doors are the only holdup as far as getting the kids out of the mobiles into those
To
classrooms?
some of the locations.
Okay.
Now, the infield with the wrestling, that's another, yeah, and I'm looking at you, Chris, for.
Yeah, the infill, they've gotten everything in the ground for the infill for the wrestling and cheer space, and they've already started their forms around the exterior of that. Floor tile did come in over Christmas break, and from my understanding is they started to install floor tile for those classrooms in that first phase. So that's a big piece of it too, because you don't want kids in the rooms without floor tile on the floor. So that installation has started. We'll see that tomorrow. We have a progress meeting tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Windows still haven't came for those classrooms yet, but that is work that can be done once the kids are actually in the rooms.
there.
We can work around them.
Okay.
Doors is the biggest hang-up.
Yeah, I knew they had pushed those out quite a bit.
Yep.
So to Mr. Greenway's question, do we know, like, once the doors get in and then we get these current students in the mobiles into those classrooms, which wing is scheduled to go out to the mobiles next? Do we know that piece? Or will it depend on?
I would have to ask Tammy, because I don't know how she's rotating her kids, to be honest with you.
Well, and I know that to me is gonna be the biggest part of the whole deal.
We're gonna start coming across the front towards where the new media center's coming, will be the next phase, through that, where the guidance is now. That will be coming back through that in the next phase, and also be blowing back through where the weight room is, down across from the auxiliary gym, and the restrooms, and the cheer and wrestling room. That area is also part of that next phase, which they've already started working in that area already.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
she's playing a little bit of a shell game with her students. If they need a space, she'll move the students
Yeah, she's good to
temporarily.
work with,
Yeah, and her and Travis are a really good team on that.
Yeah, I'll try and get back up there. I haven't been up there in a while. One last question, kind of overall, Ken, we had talked about, have y'all done an assessment for the staffing for your group? I'm not asking you for specifics, I'm just asking, do we need some help to kind of facilitate these projects?
Well, we haven't done anything like that since last year's budget session. But we are having some internal discussions about some needs and some help about what we might need to look at for this year's budget. So yes, I can tell you we're having some internal discussions
Okay,
in our department.
thank you.
The original expected completion date for Bird,
It was December 20, 2 or January 23, that time frame. It was expected to be about an 18-month project.
Honestly, I never expected that because, you know, when, the contractor, Avis, when Troy was here, I mean, he was telling us those lead times were awful, so I figured we were at least 6 months.
Yeah, roofing right now is a major issue for anybody trying to get roofing, EPDM roofing.
I just hope we meet this date.
Well, fortunately, he's already got his spot reserved, so we're good for Bird when it comes to the roofing replacement parts.
And once they get the shipments that they're expecting now, they should have all the materials that they need to finish out the project.
Oh, good deal.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're ordering, like all the doors, for instance, all the doors for the entire school will come in all at once, so we won't have these delays in other phases. They have storage issues where they're gonna store their stuff.
Yeah,
That's
we
about,
have those issues.
but that's a better issue than waiting
Yeah,
for it to
that's
come
right.
in.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
And are the cottages leased, or did we purchase those?
They are, Avis is leasing them.
Like, we didn't do that independently, that was built into Avis' contract,
Okay.
so, which was
We
really nice.
passed the buck on that one.
That was nice, right, Chris?
Yes, sir.
That's a great feature.
No raking
That
gravel
was not
on
the
this
case
one.
at Cave Spring.
Oh, no.
That was a learning opportunity.
Cave Spring was a learning
We
opportunity.
learned well from that. Let's hope we can.
Yeah, that was learning, all right. Have we ever considered that we're gonna replace any of our cottages? Not to get off base of this, but just, you know, we had talked about it sometime. Back Creek was talking about, there's one at
Clearbrook.
Clearbrook and-
Glen Cove.
Yeah, Glen
I know
Cove.
we've looked at, when the Cave Spring project was over, we had talked to the company that we leased those trailers from, and the price they gave us was extremely high to purchase any of those. And we had talked about possibly going out and seeing if we can't find something on the market, you know, that would, you know, a bid or something like that, if it ever came to us needing to replace one. We had not done that, but if I remember correctly, they want to charge us $60,000 for one of those trailers, which did not include, tear down and setup.
Yeah, I know the flooring was coming out of the one at Back Creek, I think, and the flooring.
All one of the existing ones. We have, and our carpentry crew has handled that and fixed that.
Well, it's worth asking.
Sure.
Any other project updates?
That's it for us now. We don't want to take the rest of the afternoon unless you have further
Mr.
questions.
Hudson?
I got one question. I noticed the sign out in front of Glenver High School where it's on the road there hasn't worked in some time, the digital sign. Is there like a major problem with that? Equipment or?
Yes, Mr. Hudson, there is. I don't know exactly what it was. I would have to go back and ask Mr. Hatefee or Soltis, because they're the ones who were getting the information about what was wrong with it, but it has something to do with the motherboard or something in the sign. And to repair it would cost almost as much as just to replace it. And that's been the typical case on a lot of those foundation signs throughout the county.
Okay.
Dr. Nicely might want to, that might be a good time to segue into, we made some decisions, I don't know, 6 months or a year ago about some of these signs. I don't know what we're going to do going forward, but they're so antiquated and they're becoming so costly to repair. I'm not sure did we make a decision on how we're going to handle that moving forward, or are we going to handle that moving forward?
I think those electronic signs, and I know when we did Hidden Valley, we added $10,000, I think it was.
In Valley High School, you're talking about?
Yeah, to what they were putting up, you know, to get it fixed and repaired. And I know the one at Penn Forest, we never repaired because it was too much, and, you know, it's just, those electronic signs, as you said, they're not cheap.
They just become so antiquated.
And their life expectancy is not, I mean, it's,
Right.
you know.
So I just wanted you to know, I don't know the answer and what
Yeah,
we're gonna do, or if we're gonna change that. We gotta have some nice signage, but
And it's a rather new sign. I believe it was put up when the rebuild was done, wasn't it, Chris?
North High School?
Or at Glenver.
Oh, sorry.
Then,
I know it's not that old.
I can find some information and forward it to you.
What we had decided, a previous board had decided we were not gonna continue to put money into those signs to put the temperature and the time and the date and maybe a little bit of information with the way Chuck disseminates information and how well Chuck disseminates information.
Hey, speaking of that,
Those signs.
that might be the biggest question I've gotten since I've been on the board, is what happened to Chuck?
I think he had a cold, or maybe he was wearing a mask.
And I
messaging
kicked him
me.
out of town, because I thought he was out of town, but it's actually he was in town, but his phone was messed up. So anyway, that's why we have Greg Sutphin as our backup, thank goodness. So we were able to get that out, so.
I think they thought that was the new action of the new board. I
Right,
don't
right.
2022?
Reports about the buys are greatly exaggerated.
Oh, that voice. That voice.
I think to your point, I mean, I don't know if that's something we want to, evaluate from a sort of policy or at least a regulation kind of perspective in terms of putting something in writing about what the board believes about replacing those, so that you don't get into, because otherwise what happens is, this school wants it and you do it or not, and there's not consistency. So that, if the board's pleasure would be for us to, maybe come up with a proposal on that front, that's certainly something we could come up with.
Yeah, I think that's good. I do think that it's important that we have some, whatever the signage is.
Right.
I feel like Roanoke County, we're, top of the class when it comes to schools. And, Roanoke County being a Roanoke County resident, citizen and everything else, I think it is important to project, a strong front. And so, to have the sign out there not working, to me, is almost as bad as spending the money to fix it. So we do need the policy in place or whatever is a good point. But, even if we just put up a wood, whatever somebody thinks, but I think it is important to have nice signage that, projects our posture and stance.
Mr. Ray?
Chairman, could we decide that we would at least let you look at the ones that are not working and at least give us a report
Yes, sir.
on what they are? Whether we go forward, but you might have some cost related to that as well.
The one at Burlington's not working, the one at Northside's not working. I do know
It's
that.
not working.
I don't believe Mountain View ever had one.
Okay, Riverbrooke never had one.
Bit of Valley Middle wasn't
But I'm not sure some of those want theirs working again, so. Any other questions?
I do have one more other product update that Jeff Cherry needs to give as part of that one, Mr. Chairman. This is a project update regarding some of the things that when it comes to facilities and so forth fall into the technology bucket, which is why this is Mr. Cherry's, but anything related to cameras and things of that sort falls in his category, and we've gotten some grant money that he applied for, that he's brought home to Roanoke County, that he wants to give an update on, and he'll have to bring this back to you, which I guess will now be on the 18th, next board meeting. He'd like to bring that as an action item to get your approval for this, but I wanted him to give a overview of the project today.
Wonderful. Mr.
So-
Terry?
Thanks. So in keeping with the theme of the project updates, as Dr. Nicely said, we have two time-sensitive technology updates that we'd like to introduce today and then bring them back next board meeting as an action item. First one being the 2021-2022 School Security Grant. This is one that we've applied for since 2013. It was started by Virginia in 2013 after the 2012 Sandy Hook tragedy. It's $12 million provided annually for security equipment, cameras, radios, card access, those type things. It is a competitive grant based on several factors, including local composite index, age of the security equipment in the building, local crime reports, and number of school-level incidents. There's a maximum of $250,000 per school division that can be given out. There is a 25% local match required for the school divisions. We found out over the break that we were awarded $248,000 for cameras at 4 of our schools: Cave Spring Middle, Glenver Middle, Burlington, and Green Valley. Our local match of that portion would be $62,000. And the reason that this one is time sensitive is everything has to be completed by June, and we're worried about the potential supply chain problems. But and the grant reimbursements will be out of this budget year. We've been working with Ms. Peterson to find the ways to purchase this and then get reimbursed back. So the first one is the school security grant. We don't get it every year, but we did for the last 2 years. We've gotten very lucky on getting the school security grant. The second one is the Emergency Connectivity Funds grant. And that one is one-time money provided by the federal government for this budget year, this school year. And it's a total of $7.17 billion allotted for U.S. schools for remote learning needs. So that would be laptops and hotspots are the two things that qualify. Now, there are a lot of red tape that you have to go through to get money from this grant. And laptop-wise, we're covered because we already have a laptop for every student. Hotspots, we have hotspots that we use, but our data plans are going to run out. So we applied for the hotspot data plans. It is a competitive grant as well. And the thing about this ECF fund, or Emergency Connectivity Fund grant, is there is no local match for this one. We found out over the break that we were awarded $164,948 for this grant. And it will provide an additional 1 year of data for our hotspots. Now, the time sensitivity on this one is due to a completion of February 18th for the reimbursement process. So that's why this one is very time sensitive. So that's the two grants, two pieces of good news over the break that we found out. And we wanted to let you know about it as information today before we bring it back to the next school board meeting.
So if we're not going to have a school board meeting until the 18th, do you need it? I mean, is it critical that we should take action today?
Well, that would be up to you guys. I mean, anything quicker would help on especially the, well, either one of those grants, just to make sure that we get funding in place for it. But I certainly it wouldn't bother me at all if it was done quicker than that.
Since we just received the information in the last few days, didn't want to put you guys in the position of asking you to do that. But there is a time sensitivity to it, so.
So I guess the only question really for me would be, where's the money going to come from, just for the $62,000?
The local match for the.
Is that the?
The local match for that fund always comes out of minor capital reserve.
Okay. So that would come out of minor capital. I'm good with it.
I'm not sure about Robert's rules, except I think you have to have a 2/3 vote if we to move it forward within the same meeting. So I think it's a 2/3 vote, so I think it would be okay if we agree.
Well, we'll find out if we,
Yeah,
if we
we'll
make a
find out.
motion, we'll find out. I would make a
It's-
motion that we move forward with the two recommendations from Mr. Terry.
I can second it.
Does anybody have any other questions of Mr. Terry beforehand, before we?
I mean, it is equipment that we need. I mean, it,
Yes, this is
Okay.
equipment. And the cameras, for the last year's grant, we got it for 3 of the middle schools, and this year would be the other 2 middle schools.
great.
This is replacements?
Most of the middle schools is additional camera coverage.
Okay. Well, for example, I know over at Green Valley, that whole back area, that she's had some vandalism issues,
Yeah,
and so
we
of course
have.
she didn't want that, so that's
Well, they
probably
got a little
correct.
cove that they can go into and sort of get away from the camera.
12 months gives us $165,000 almost for 12 months worth of hotspots. How many hotspots is that?
705.
Okay, that makes sense then.
It's not 50.
Yeah, I was wondering how many hotspots could that possibly
I
be?
know. It's a lot.
We've got a motion and a second. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Greenway,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Bishani,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ray,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hudson,
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good job getting those grants.
Thank you.
That's
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
free money for the most part. All right, item number 4.03, a COVID update. Dr. Stigall. Did you enjoy Texas?
I did.
Hmm.
Nice warm weather. It's a great time.
You brought some back with you for a little
I know,
while.
right? Yeah. All right. There we go. All right, our COVID update. So I have lots of information for you, so I'm going to take this mask off so you can hear me clearly. As I go through this, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stop me and ask questions, because I'm going to review the new CDC guidance along with the VDH recommendations from that guidance. It's quite detailed, so we'll get through it the quickest we can. So just our typical data update. As you can see, the state of Virginia is back to all red, high transmission. This is the most updated information for Roanoke County. We're at a 27.1 positivity rate. Last month when I reported to you, we were at 9.3. And last month we had 277 cases. Today, for the last 7-day average, we're at 626, more than double since the last time I reported to you. Cases, this one I'm just showing you the picture because you can see this is from the very beginning of the pandemic on the far left. You see where we're at of new cases per 100,000, much higher than we have been throughout the entire pandemic. Again, this is Roanoke County data. Percent of PCR tests, just as a visual, showing the same thing, starting from March, going all the way to the current date, much higher percentage than we've been throughout the whole pandemic. Took a look at the vaccination rates to see if they've changed any. They've increased just a little bit. We're at 28% for the younger age group. We were at 24, 25. So all these have come up just a little bit. You can see 10 through 15, we're up to 60%, and 16 to 17, we jumped up to 64.5. Not a huge difference, but since last month, there's been an increase in youth vaccination. So I want to take a look at, just to give you an idea of where we're at for this school year, starting in August. This is the total number of positive cases by month. So you can see the number of cases by month for staff. The total there, we're showing 144 through those months. If you divide that by the number of staff we have, that's about a 7% impact of our staff have experienced positive COVID. If you take a look at our students, those are the number of cases per month. Of course, clearly seeing September being the highest number. I've got a feeling that will change come January. But as of right now, September was our worst month. And that is at about 879, that's 7% of our student population. Monthly in-school exposure. So we've always prided ourselves on, we think that our mitigation strategies are working. We're seeing very little in-class transmission, which means we have very few classroom shutdowns. We've only shut down one school. And in those classrooms, they've been classrooms where they've been very young children, or in classrooms where they've had trouble, being able to maintain mask wearing. So I think our mitigation strategies we've done a really nice job, and I think that shows in these in-school exposures. If you take a look at staff, we've only had 9 total staff exposed in school. If you take a look at students, we've had 1,256. That's about 9% of our total population. Now, I know we want to take a look at the number of in-school exposures and how many of those tested positive. We have racked our brains trying to figure out how to pull that information for you, and it's going to be immensely time consuming to do that. But what we can say is the quarantines, we've been averaging between 300 and 500 people quarantined at our highest time. My guess is January, we're going to be right back up to 500, if not higher, quarantines. So I guess the most important thing we need to know is our teachers and our staff are working very hard to provide online instruction as well as maintain in-class instruction for 500 to 600 students. So that number is not coming down. So just to know that the quarantine numbers are higher because those numbers are a running number, because like the kids are out 5 days, 10 days, some 15 days. And so you can only get a snapshot because it's the same kids every day, right? Because they're out for 10 to 15 days straight. So it's hard to pick out the number. We don't currently track the number of kids who are exposed in school as compared to out of school. Our quarantine list are all the kids. If they're exposed playing travel soccer, they're on our quarantine list, but they're not on our exposure list, if that makes sense. All right, so here's what we are currently required to do as a public school in the state of Virginia. School bus transportation, the CDC has a federal order that applies to all public schools and private schools that regardless of mask policy in the school, everyone has to be wearing a mask regardless of vaccination. The second thing is on August 12th of 21, the state health commissioner put out a public health order that says that all individuals age 2 or older must wear a mask while indoors in public and private schools. Then we had state law, SB 1303, went into effect, is in effect until August 1 of 2022, unless something changes, which requires each school board to offer in-person instruction in the manner in which it adheres to the maximum extent practicable to add current applicable mitigation strategies for K-12 schools to reduce the transmission of COVID-19 that have been provided by the Federal Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. So we are currently practicing all of those mitigation strategies that are practicable, and I think at this point so far, we've been able, obviously, to keep schools open and continue on with in-person learning. The next thing we have is the Virginia Department of Labor and Industry requires all K-12 school employees to wear masks while indoors during substantial and high community transmission. Clearly, we're in high transmission. We haven't been out of high or substantial transmission this entire school year. So we are bound by the DOLE that all employees in public school must wear a mask. On December 17th of 2021, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals allowed OSHA's vaccination and testing emergency temporary standard to move forward with lifting earlier court stay that put the ETS on hold. In response to the court's order, OSHA has initiated an aggressive implementation to enforce this schedule. Their current schedule vaccination requirements are set for January 10th of 2022, and enforcement will be delayed until February 9th of 2022. However, litigation process continues as the court's decisions have been appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. We are currently waiting for final court ruling to move forward with a grant funded by the Virginia School Screening Testing and Assurance Program. We call it VISTA. This is a partnership between VDH and VDOE, and it provides school divisions with grant money to help support screen testing for unvaccinated staff. So what that looks like is we hire staff to help us manage this process. We allow free screen testing. It's weekly testing for unvaccinated staff, and they have to provide a negative test on a weekly basis if they're unvaccinated. So we have the MOU. We've gotten it back. It's been approved. But we have not moved forward with that MOU because we're waiting to see what happens with this law moving forward. If it does go forward, it's probably going to take us 4 to 6 weeks to get this program running. And we may be a little bit delayed hitting their adjusted timelines, but we won't be far off.
Can you go back to
Yeah.
that? Doesn't the bottom partnership between VDH and VDOE provides grants for school divisions to support weekly screen testing for unvaccinated staff? Doesn't that seem a little hypocritical? Why wouldn't you test for vaccinated staff?
Well, you can.
We all get it now.
You can. So the screen system, the screen testing that this grant provides, we can screen students, we can screen staff, we can screen anybody we want to. So you can. Once we're into the system, it does allow us to screen whatever population we want.
So we can change that from testing for unvaccinated staff. Let's just test everybody, if that's
You
the case.
can.
Yeah.
Why not?
So this is the,
Voluntarily.
May I? So my understanding, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that that VISTA program was set up in place for those who did not want to take the vaccine. So that's a background. So if you have more than 100 people who are working for you, some people are going to exempt themselves out of it, religious exemption or medical exemption, And so that provides a way for those people to then continue to work
Yes.
So outside of,
without the individual who owns the company having to pay for it, which you can imagine would be extremely expensive.
sure, so these people that don't, they still have that choice. So really, that's all that's speaking to then.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can manipulate however we want to, but when we had the discussion, it was gonna cost us $14,000 a week to test our employees who currently are not, we project are not vaccinated. Because we don't have that number yet, but that's what our we're at 80% vaccination rate, so you can kind of calculate it that way. It would cost us $14,000 a week to test those employees. So that's why we put the MOU
Those employees, those unvaccinated?
Unvaccinated employees.
Okay.
So they can continue to work. But to
Right.
your point, we know vaccines are not stopping the spread, so.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and all this does, and everything you're saying is exactly right. All this does is would put us in compliance with the OSHA standard if it goes into effect.
To get the grant.
Right.
Right, the grant that we got puts us in a position where we can be in compliance as we
How-
move forward.
You say $14,000? I mean, that was half the answer, but how much is the grant?
The testing's free, so what they do, they connect us with the vendor. It's the same vendor that runs Walgreens testing, so it's a very reputable company. And we hire 3 employees that come in and work for us. And so what it would basically look like is we would set up time maybe here at Central, because it's a central location. And employees would come in before work, after work, that staff would be here along with the vendor. They would give those tests, the results come back, they send notification, we just keep track of that information that every week they're tested.
And they are employed by us?
Yeah, yes, we would use the grant money to hire them.
Grant money, okay.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that.
We'd like to avoid doing anything
Yeah,
like this.
yeah.
But, to your question, Mr. Ray, so the only reason we had looked into what it would cost us if we had to pay for it was because originally the state was saying, oh, you can only access those funds if you're doing screening of students, which is not something we were wanting to do. That's one of the reasons we started looking into what it would cost us if we had to bear that cost. But then they changed the rules and said, no, you don't have to do that in order to access the grant. So at this point, it won't cost us anything. We'll keep you posted.
Yeah. All right, so the new VDH isolation and quarantine interim guidance that came out December 30th of 2021. The new guidance is contingent upon universal mask wearing within the school. So right out of the gate, all this guidance is contingent on that fact. But if you, basically the way this rolls out, and there's a lot of scenarios in here and it gets very muddy very quick. But a lot of people like to think that it's moving the 10-day quarantine to a 5-day period, and there is no period there. There's lots of commas there. So that's what I'm going to go through now. So if you're positive, if you've tested positive for COVID, instead of the 10 days, you have a 5-day, as long as you have no symptoms and your symptoms are better, meaning that the respiratory piece of your symptoms have cleared up. That does not mean taste and smell. It just means the respiratory type symptoms. And you wear a mask around others for the next 5 days of isolation. So those 2 things have to be there for you to return after you've tested positive. If you have a fever, of course, you've got to stay home until you're fever-free for 24 hours without medicine. So here, I'm going to go through a whole bunch of other recommendations that VDH provided. Just know that CDC always comes out with school guidance. CDC has not done that yet, therefore VDH stepped in and has sent interim school guidance, and this is what I'm sharing. But all across their document they say, this is our recommendation until the CDC provides their interim guidance. So it's possible that these can change at any time. The new guidance applies to K-12 setting when all individuals can properly and consistently mask for an additional 5 days after the end of the 5-day isolation and quarantine period, which we can certainly allow for that. The isolation, which means people who have confirmed COVID. If the individual is unable to consistently or correctly wear a mask, for example, very young children, developmental issues, we would recommend that they do a 10-day quarantine, not the 5-day. So that will be to something that we will make that decision between our school nurses, our principals, and administration here. So that will be on a case-by-case situation. Based on the information provided by the CDC, a person is considered to be infectious on days 6 through 10 of the isolation period. That's the reason they're enforcing strict mask use for days 6 through 10. However, if you think about it, there's always a weekend between the 10 days, right? So you're quarantined for 5 days at home. You come back on the 6th day, you're supposed to wear a mask. There's 2 days of a weekend. That really means you're only wearing a mask for 3 days. So those people who have tested positive can return on the 6th day, will have to wear a mask for at least 3 days, and then as long as they're not symptomatic and meet that criteria. According to the CDC, the majority of the COVID-19 transmission occurs early in the course of the illness, generally 1 to 2 days prior to symptoms, and then 2 to 3 days after symptoms. That's where they're coming down with the 5 days. So that's their justification for that 5-day isolation period. If you have been exposed to someone with COVID-19, the updated requirements for quarantine. This is if you've been exposed. You don't have it, but you've been exposed to a positive person. This is where it gets tricky with all the little details. If you are unvaccinated or you have not received your booster. So what that means is more than 6 months past your booster, because you get 6 months with that booster or 6 months with that vaccination. If you're more than that 6 months, then you should quarantine for 5 days as long as you do not have any symptoms within that time, and then you must wear the mask for 5 days after. So if you're unvaccinated, have not gotten your booster, you have to quarantine for 5 days and wear a mask for 5 days. If you have received your booster shot or received your second dose within the last 6 months, and then it shows some particulars here talking about J&J dose within the last 2 months, you do not need to quarantine following an exposure, but you should wear a mask for 10 days as a precaution. So this is when we typically say if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine. There's some stipulations added to that. If you've been vaccinated and are within the time frame, no more than 6 months or 2 months after the J&J, it has to be the booster, you don't have to quarantine. So that has changed a little bit. So people who, if you're past your 6 months after your second shot and you haven't received the booster, you do not qualify for exempt of quarantine. Okay, for quarantine, these are people who have been exposed. If an individual is unvaccinated and has not received the recommended booster, and they are unable to correctly wear a mask, they will be quarantined for 10 days. Again, that will be a decision that we will make together. Children who are in days 6 through 10, period, after isolation or quarantine, should ideally be 6 feet away from others during meals, snacks, and other unmasked period. That causes a little concern for us because we're doing our best during lunchtime to keep our kids at 6 feet when they're unmasked. However, we all know that's a difficult thing to do. So, our schools, the principals already know this. They're thinking through the best way to maximize that 6 feet, or making sure that as soon as students quit eating, they put the mask back on to help prevent any type of transmission. To ensure confidentiality, the health department recommends that all students maintain 6 feet of distance between each other during unmasked periods. If a child with COVID is in the 6 to 10 day isolation period and they spend greater than 15 minutes unmasked, less than 6 feet from others, then the other individuals are considered a close contact. However, you'll see here in a few minutes, we are not going to contact trace days 6 through 10. We're not going to do that. So you'll see in another slide where that recommendation is made. Individuals can participate in sports as long as they adhere to the strict mask usage on days 6 through 10, including during play. This one's a little, I'm not really sure how this one would play out because currently when our kids are on the floor playing, they're not required to wear masks. So this would self-identify students if they're wearing masks. Of course, it could be an optional use, but that is a recommendation. I struggle with that one a little bit. But it says basically if they can't wear that mask, then they should isolate for 10 days and not participate. Schools and families should be aware that team sports and other extracurricular activities, especially indoor activities involving shouting and singing, increase the risk of transmission, of course, during days 6 through 10. They currently recommend that individuals that come into contact with someone under the isolation of days 6 through 10 not be considered a close contact, as long as both people were correctly wearing masks. So from day 6 to 10, we are not going to contact trace because we currently have a mask mandate in schools. As long as they were wearing their masks and they were on day 6 through 10 and had close contact, we are not contact tracing because that is the recommendation. The VDH says that they recognize transmission is possible on day 6 through 10, especially without proper mask use, but that we must balance the ability to perform contact tracing with the exposures that are at the highest risk. Basically what they're coming to full realization of is we have to set limits on how much contact tracing we can do because we're maximized. We are maximized, they are maximized. So it's an effort to kind of help relieve that pressure. Previous VDH guidance stated that unvaccinated children who test positive for COVID within the last 90 days. This is that thing where we said if you've had COVID within the last 90 days, you're considered, you don't have to quarantine because you still have enough antibodies. So CDC has not come out with direction on that yet. So as of now, we are still allowing that to happen within the 90-day time period. They do not need to quarantine. Early data indicates that prior infection to COVID-19 may not provide immunity against Omicron variant. Therefore, it is unclear if the 90-day exemption for quarantine is still applicable for unvaccinated individuals. So currently, CDC has not responded on this one, so the health department is recommending that we still follow the 90-day. However, it may change. Okay, CDC and VDH do not recommend requiring a negative COVID-19 test in order for unvaccinated students or staff to return to school. So we did have that in place where on day 5 you could test, and then on day 7 or 8 you could return. So now they're recommending that we don't test. There is a place in here that says they recommend that you do test, but they recommend that we don't require testing to return to school and return to work. But there is a recommendation that you go get tested if you feel that you have come in contact with COVID.
To ask a quick question, I don't mean to get you off your pace here, but how does that, do you know off the top of your head, I don't want to put you on the spot, how that would jive with the whole test to stay pilot that they're starting?
So the test to stay is a screening system. So what that does is if you've come in contact with someone who's positive, you can elect with parent permission to test to stay in school. So what they do is they test you on a regular basis, and as long as you continue to test negative, you stay in school. Okay. So it's an election basis by parent that says, I want to keep my child in school and we're going to agree to do this testing. It's really screening is what it is. Okay, individuals who have a fever, of course, should stay at home for 24 hours until the fever without medicine. And then they should, of course, wear a mask for 5 additional days for a total of 10 days. Okay, so the VDH is working quickly to incorporate the new CDC isolation and quarantine guidance into the test to stay. This is what Dr. Nice was talking to. They do have schools in the state of Virginia who are piloting this. And so they're discussing the feasibility and benefits of proceeding with this plan. Really what it is that they contact trace. If you've been identified as a potential contact, then you can elect to go into this test to stay program. And you can elect to stay in school along with, as long as you're not symptomatic, you agree to test. As soon as you become symptomatic, you have to go out for quarantine.
Do we provide that agree to test?
It is a permission form that the parent would have to sign.
And so they would test in the school?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And it's very similar to the screening process with the VISTA. So they're probably using the same vendor, and if we were to do this, we could use the same vendor we have in place. That's the whole point of those vendors, is to screen test. Like, remember we talked about we could screen test our athletes, or we could screen test a group of individuals if we wanted to. That's what they're doing here. They're just letting parents, if you've been, like, the nurse will call and say your child's been in contact with somebody with COVID, they're gonna have to quarantine for 5 days, the new rule. Or you can test, if you test negative, you have no symptoms, you can come back tomorrow, because it's a 15-minute test. And then if it's negative, you come back. So parents would agree to do that. So that's the test to stay.
I just wanted to make sure that they weren't having to pay for that,
No,
because, you know, the access for lower income.
yeah,
Well-
it's associated with this VISTA program.
Okay.
On the other hand, with that, I mean, and not to sound negative, but I mean, I think there's a real concern with some of these ideas and pilots. I mean, you know, it all depends on the availability of tests, right? And I think that's becoming, you know, still an issue. I mean, are they available? And because, you know, I'm not sure it's a magic bullet. I don't know.
No, but
We had some of these tests to give out, and we gave all of ours out, and they also have a very quick deadline, expiration date on them. And so we called to ask for more, to have them here, but when we returned to school, and they told us that they hadn't met their limit, they could not send us anymore. Our original understanding was you just reorder and we'll send them to you, so they're already in a backlog, and that was right out of the gate, so.
The accuracy percentage on those, and it may be too early to tell, but I thought I saw somewhere they're only in the 80%, 84% accurate.
If you have symptoms, they're 80% accurate.
If you don't, they're more accurate if you're symptomatic and less accurate if you're asymptomatic.
Yeah,
But that's what people, this is what people are buying in stores as well.
yeah. Dr. Walensky just came out and made a statement about testing and how you shouldn't be testing unless you're symptomatic, because
Right.
they're having so many false positives, is my understanding.
That's right.
Like an exceptional amount of false positives.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. All right, moving forward. So, using the new isolation and quarantine guidance, which we have implemented this because when we reviewed the guidance, we all discussed it and thought, well, let's go ahead and put this in place because that will get people back quicker that were currently on the 10-day quarantine. We can get them back in 5 days. We can get our staff back. We can get our students back. So we have already implemented this. Our nurses did an amazing job. Everybody who was on the quarantine list, they had to make contact with them, adjust all their dates, tell them when they could return to school. So we are currently following this new guidance. And what we're going to do to move forward is we're going to start collecting more data, because we've heard you clearly that you want us to show you the number of people who are quarantined and how many of them test positive, and how many are in school and how many are out of school contacts. So we're going to keep that data for you. So we're starting that already, so we can have better data for you. So that is what we're going to do moving forward. And just as additional information, if universal masking is made optional, the VDH isolation and quarantine guidance calls for longer isolation and quarantine periods. The reason for that is they put in all these 3 feet with no mask, 3 feet as long as students have masks. They put that in there to help schools get back to face-to-face instruction. If we don't have masks, then that goes away. So also we have that, so it goes back to a longer quarantine, longer isolation periods, and it goes back to the 6 feet of contact tracing. Currently we're at the 3 feet because we're wearing masks. So just know if universal masking goes away, the recommendation from the VDH, all those contact tracing, that goes from 3 feet to 6 feet, and then the quarantine and isolation times extend. So that's that would be their recommendation if we were to do that. So that's all the information I have there. Any questions you have? That was a lot.
I've got one. How do you know what the percentage of vaccinations are amongst our students?
So the health department keeps that record, and they have it broken down by Roanoke, and they do it by zip code, I'm assuming, because Salem picked up some of our kids and vice versa, but they keep it through zip code. And they provide that to us. Actually, you can find it on the VDH website under the dashboard, and you go under vaccinations and hit demographics, and it breaks it down by locality.
It's like 24153 could include the Roanoke County.
Which is close to the 24018.
Right. Well, same thing, 24012, that's mostly city, but also some county. So,
Yeah.
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 So we're right around, for middle school, high school, 61-62% vaccination.
Ms. Vashani?
Regarding the contact tracing, I know you have said it's difficult to go back to look at the contact tracing. I just kind of find it hard to believe that we didn't establish a data set to look at that. I mean, that would have been very valuable information to have. The students that are sent home to quarantine because of an exposure, what percentage of those students are coming back or can't come back because they actually test, they have COVID, confirmed COVID with symptoms.
Because we can still do it now, but I'm just going to be very apparent, it's not going to be accurate. Because here's what happens. You might be quarantined and we might send you home and you're on our list, but lots of times when nurses call and they're contact tracing, they'll say, do you know if your child's been exposed to anybody who has COVID? Well, yeah, my uncle who I saw last week has it, and then they also just got exposed at school. How do we know which one it was exposed? There's a lot of cross-pollination of that, and it's very difficult. We just take it and put it on our school one, even though we're not 100% sure it's ours. So it's not going to be 100% science anyway.
Yeah, there
and I'll just
seems
be
to
honest with you, when we started this, we were doing everything we can to keep up with contact tracing.
Sure.
I mean, our poor nurses work
Right.
all weekend, all holiday, and they are the ones inputting this information. They're overloaded. They're overloaded.
And I don't mean to sound critical. I think my point is this, and you said it, it's extremely difficult to
It
contact
is.
trace.
It is.
It's just, there's so many variables, there's so many layers.
It
There's
is.
a lot of bias involved, and there's a lot of factors that
Yes.
make it difficult, and it's extremely time consuming.
It is. Yeah.
So, thank you.
And I'm happy to see that the health department's acknowledging that by saying we're not going to contact trace from day 6 to 10 because we're drowning trying to contact trace. And I think they've done an excellent job, and I think we've done better than a lot of school divisions that we've talked to, that some of them have just given up on some of it. But I think they've worked really hard to do that, and I think it shows in our numbers. And we're not shutting down classrooms, and there's very little transmission happening in our classrooms.
Anybody else?
All right.
Thank you, Dr. Stegall.
Yes.
All right. Item 4.04, explanation of financial reports submitted through the consent agenda. Ms. Peterson.
I can pull them up.
Okay.
Talking about snow.
Well, Dr. Stegall may have brought the warm weather from Texas, but I apologize, I may have brought the snow from Michigan.
This is your fault.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I wanted to take the time, we're having some new board members here, and it's always a good idea to take a look at the financial reports that we submit on a monthly basis. Typically, what you're going to see on board docs is this monthly report. The first 3 items on this report, and I'll kind of give a very high-level review of each report. The first 3 you will see more often. I try and get that up here almost every board meeting so that you are aware of the minor capital reserves. That's kind of a big thing that we like to keep you aware of. And then the rest of the items, starting with the general fund financial report and below, are the actual monthly reports. And typically we have to wait until the month closes within the first couple of weeks of the month. So we will put them on board docs for that second board meeting. If there's only one board meeting in the month, then we end up kind of like now, where we couldn't get it on the December, we could not get November on the December board meeting, so then we bring them to the January meeting. And I don't know why I'm putting these in since it's so far away. So, just to take a quick look, the first report is the capital reserves report. We have reserves in the minor capital fund and the major capital fund. This is an annual report. The beginning shows the rollover from one year to the next. And then throughout the year, we will take away the reserves or add back to the reserves as projects are closed. We only use the reserves upon approval by the school board. This, except for the CMP reserves, facilities has the option through policy to be able to use the CMP reserves with more leeway. However, the major capital, minor capital, and the turf reserves are required to be approved by the school board before we use them. And there is a policy out there. So you can kind of see the different projects that were approved this year. And we come down to the general ledger balance and then any appropriation, and then you can see right now this 2.9 million is where that security grant funds will come from that you approved earlier today. So that's just an overall, we call that the capital reserve report. The next report, this shows all of the projects that were set up using the major capital fund, the minor capital fund, and the bond fund. So these are the projects that come from the front report, and it shows you the budget, the name of the project, the budget, all the years of expenditures. So these are multi-year, the total amount, the encumbrance if there is any contract open with them, and the remaining amount. So that if you have an idea on a specific project, you want to know where it stands, you can pull this up and take a look at that project. Similarly, on the CMP projects, we have a very similar report, same exact columns, but these are the ones that Mr. Lowe's team will set up using the CMP funds. The items down here in red are set up using ESSER funds and ARPA funds. And so these are technically not coming from the CMP reserves or the major capital reserves, but we did want to get them on a report since they are a capital project.
You back those out at some point?
Off of the report? Yeah, when the budget's closed and the project is closed, we'll pull it off.
Okay.
So like next month, well, I guess that has an encumbrance. But like this one right here is probably going to come off next month, where it's zero and there's no encumbrance. So the next report is our, we're getting into the financial reports. These are for the school board itself. We've got the general fund. The left-hand side shows the last year to date for that month. So this is November. And then the right-hand side shows the current year to date. So you can kind of eyeball, the activity to see where are we in line with where we were last year. We've got a summary for revenues and expenditures, the revenue details, and then we get into the expenditures by department. Similarly, we have other funds set up the same way, but all of these, oh, thank you. All of these are the other funds. Trying to get to the top. So we'll start with the fleet replacement fund, and I won't drone through this, but you do have every other fund over here. Then we have a summary of COVID-19 funding. So this is as of November 30th, and you can take a look. These items have not been approved yet. That's why they're in red, although they have been applied for. But then all the others are still outstanding. And you can see we are making our way through some of these.
But those items will be approved.
Everything on here has already been approved by the school board.
Yeah.
But if you're asking with VDOE if they're going to approve it, our initial pass for that add-on grant, the application, they rejected it for additional information, which I think they did for a lot of school divisions, and it is due back this Friday. So we are working and we'll get that submitted here shortly.
That's well in time before the expiration.
Yes. So the next report is for our insurance reserves. These are our health insurance fund, our dental insurance fund, and our risk management fund. It just shows by year, and it's got all of the history from 2009 all the way to the current year, and we do it up to the month that we're reporting. So you can see in November, in our health insurance fund, we've got 6.6 million of reserves. We have worked with our insurance consultant, and they recommend that we maintain a balance of at least 3.7 to 4.2 million in the insurance reserve. So we are sitting with the healthy insurance reserve fund.
And what did we use last year?
Almost 2 million?
Yeah, I thought it was around 2 million.
To balance our budget.
Yeah.
That's what you're asking.
Because of the
Yeah.
COVID.
Right.
Yeah. So then the next report is a check disbursement report. These are checks and wires that the county issues for school board operations. We do not have one up here for the activity funds. And the next report is the payroll. It just shows the total amount of the payroll checks that were issued by pay period for that month. Again, these are issued by the county. So the reports do come from them. And then the last report is the student activity fund report. This is a cash basis report. It's a little bit different. It comes from a separate accounting system which the bookkeepers maintain. But this will show in summary the receipts, disbursements, and balances, and then you can look down at the individual schools. So like I said, these are the monthly reports will be out typically the second board meeting, unless I'm in budget session, and sometimes maybe they could be a little bit later. But we do our best, and the first three will typically be each board meeting. But we don't typically go over them, so that's why I wanted to give an introduction to each of these reports. That's
Thank
all I
you.
have on this.
Any questions? I know. All right. Item 4.05, 2022-23, budget work session number 1.
I don't hear anyone jumping up and down.
Do you have books for us?
I sure do, Mr.
Oh,
Ray.
okay.
So I took a little bit different,
Hey, man, you wanna talk?
okay, I'll get the nice ones right here. A different approach. Last year we did little books and handed them out. This year I have given you a binder to put them in. So if you find after the end of the budget session you like one way or over the other, just let me know. So here we are. I cannot believe we are starting the budget season yet again. Today, being our first work session together, I would like to go over the budget development process here at the schools. We'll take a look at the governor's budget. And then we've got 4 funds that have long-term replacement schedules associated with them that we have taken a look at and scheduled out. And I've got a long list of budget priorities from last year, this year, and from the replacement funds that I'll share with you as kind of a jumping point for discussions throughout the budget process. Now keep in mind, I've not talked to any of the departments yet. That'll be the next part of the phase for this. So with budget development, I did record a little video, and I did post it on our website. So if you want to hear this information again, please feel free to go to our website and watch the little video about the budget development. I'll try and keep it quick here since we have a lot of information to review, and you've been in here a long time already. So the budget itself, it represents the outline of the division's education program. And so it really should line up with our core values and what we're teaching. It is also the primary means by which our directors manage their expenses and their costs. We do it because it's required. The Board of Supervisors will actually adopt it into a law, and we legally cannot spend more than what we have appropriated by the Board of Supervisors, and we legally cannot spend more money than what we receive. So that's a interesting kind of position to be in, that all of this is very, very legal in the Code of Virginia. So with our budget development, there really are 5 phases that the schools go through. And this really has evolved into a year-long process and not one that only takes place one time a year. The planning typically begins in October when I prepare the budget calendar and provide it to the school board for their approval. And with this, I typically lay out what I think the budget work sessions will be. I'll take a look at when the General Assembly should be meeting, whether it's a long session or a short session, and I'll take a stab at when they will have their different important timelines so that we can schedule our work sessions to be productive. Moving into the preparation, that'll occur between November and March when we have to submit our budget to approve the budget and then submit it to the Board of Supervisors. We do hold stakeholder meetings. We have a public hearing always at the second or regular school board meeting in January. I publish a budget blog on our website and provide communications as much as I can to the employees. We do look at revenue projections and the expenditure priorities. So as I said, the adoption, the school board will adopt the budget first in March. We will hand it over to the county April 1st. We will present it to the county at one of their meetings in April, and then they will adopt the budget. Of course, their budget process isn't over, so they will not approve an ordinance until in May when their budget process is over. So it's really a 2-step process for us. They approve our budget, and then they adopt an ordinance of the appropriation for our budget. And then the implementation really starts July 1st and goes all the way through June. When we load the budget into the financial system, we let all the departments know that they can go out there and verify that what was loaded was what they expected, and then they start spending and using up their funds. Now, they do have reports online that they can run that are budget to actual reports so that they can ensure they are not overspending, because when we do the budget, they have the wherewithal to spend between their divisions as much as they want, and if they go over budget, that's okay, but their bottom line for their department may not go over budget. That's how we ensure that as a school division, we're not going over budget. And then the evaluation comes at the end of the year. We have an auditor come in and review the annual comprehensive financial report, which we just finished back in November. We pull together that report and look at our year-end carryover balances, take that to the Board of Supervisors and get their approval. And then we're back to planning. But this doesn't happen in isolation. As you'll see, I do have a slide with budget priorities that really have cropped up ever since June, as we've had work sessions and the school board has approved various different spendings that would require an adoption of original budget going forward. So it's really important. You can't look at our budget without understanding what funds we have and how they're used. A fund, in its basic sense of the accounting form, is a self-balancing set of accounts. So for every revenue, you have to have an expenditure. For every asset, you have a liability and fund balance. The whole fund itself has to balance. It is also set up for a very specific, particular purpose. What we have in your packets and up on the board are the funds that we budget. And the big blue fund up at the top is our general fund. It is our main operating fund. It's where most of our money rolls through. Below that are 4 orange funds. These are our long-term planning funds. So you'll see below that, you've got the 4 long-term planning tools, which we're going to discuss those during this meeting after we talk about the governor's budget. This includes instructional resources, fleet replacement, technology replacement, and the capital projects fund. Off to the right is our grant fund. So this is where we record all of our state and federal grants. So whatever money we receive is what we can spend. So that has to be set up in isolation. And then we have the nutrition fund. So that is separated because the federal law requires that any revenue the nutrition department makes must stay in the nutrition fund, although they can receive transfers from other funds, but they cannot transfer money out of their fund to other general school operations.
So it's still about $1 million?
I'm sorry?
$1 million, is that
Sitting in their fund?
nutrition that they get, right?
I think so.
Okay.
And then we have the student activity fund, which we just had to incorporate it as a fund in our financial statements this year, so that was a little bit different way of looking at that fund. As we go through the budget development, it really is a balancing act. And it really is trying to figure out what money do we have coming in and how are we going to spend it. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got state money that comes in, and we go through 3 different iterations of state money. Today we're going to review the governor's budget, but when crossover occurs, we're going to get the Senate and House budget, and we'll review that. And then at the very end of the process, we will get the final General Assembly budget, and we'll look at the revenues once again. The local funds come from the County of Roanoke. They do have a revenue sharing agreement. So we follow what they set up in that revenue sharing agreement. And then the other funds, we have various federal tuition fees and other miscellaneous money that comes in. So we take that, all the money coming in, and we have to balance that against the priorities for long-term planning, for the current expenditures, and for compensation. When we think of each one of these groups of expenditures, there's a lot of information and a lot to take in. So today's work session, we'll talk about the long-term planning. We'll talk about the 4 funds and what we do to smooth out our transfers into those funds to make budgeting easier year after year. The next work session will be purely about compensation. And so we'll be looking at that last, on the far right bucket. We'll be looking at the pay scales. We'll be looking at pay increase. We'll be looking at staffing. We'll look at health insurance premiums, leave pay options, everything that goes into, our employees. And then the third work session, we will have the department budgets ready for your review. So we moved that a little bit this year, so that's going to be a little bit different order than what you're used to. So if there are no questions, I know I'm kind of running through all this, and this is a lot of information. I will roll on. All right, so moving into the governor's budget. One of the first things we do have to look at, we receive after the governor or the House and Senate or the General Assembly, after they approve their budget, they will give the information to the Virginia Department of Education, who will create a calculator tool that finance directors will access to determine how much money we are expected to get from that iteration of the revenue budget. One of the main items that we have to come up with, all of those tools are based on our March 31st ADM. So we've got to budget what that is. So this first slide really just is a photograph of our declining ADM. It's 10 years worth, so from 2012 through 2021, those are our actual March 31st ADM numbers. And then the 2022 is our budgeted ADM. And as I reported previously, we do expect that to come up for the end of this year. So we do expect, maybe 153 more students than what that is shown, which is why we have presented to the Board of Supervisors with your approval to increase our budget. So then this slide shows the most recent 5 years actuals, the 2022 and next year's estimates. We have the grade level progression. So we run our own analysis of what ADM is expected to be by pulling the live birth data and determining when they're going to go into school. So we drop that in to come up with what our kindergarten population is expected to be. And then we do a survivorship. We take every grade and we roll everybody up one grade and see what kind of survivorship we have year after year. Based on going through that population, you can see the different years, how much we had. We are expecting next year to have 13,140 students in our ADM. The VDOE, their tool came out, and for next year, it had 13,000. Did I say 1,000? I meant 13,140. So the VDOE tool came out, and it had 13,135. That's pretty darn close. I don't know that I've ever had RCPS estimate within 5 students of what the VDOE estimated separately. And so we're going to go ahead and roll with the 13,140.
The interesting thing is the drop in 1,000 students over the last decade. So this is where you ask yourself, well, why did we drop 1,000 students? So why did we?
So we did have, several years ago, maybe in 2016, that demographic study performed. And I believe the consultant said we were a factor of a good school system. That we educated our students well enough that they wanted to go get higher paying jobs somewhere else.
Yeah. So
Would that
jobs, that's where I'm going with it.
Would that be based on maybe the population has changed from so many per family? This is maybe 1 or 2? I mean, does that have anything to do with demographics?
It has something to do with we're not bringing jobs. I mean, if you had the jobs, the kids would be here.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about expectancy. Has that changed, from people what they're considered?
I think that's definitely a factor, but then to Mr. Greenway's point, you gotta make up for that by, bringing in more, right?
Bringing in the people with the jobs.
Right.
I think many families are smaller than they were a generation ago.
So in the last decade, they've stopped having kids?
As many.
As many, I guess.
Instead of 3 or 4 children per family, we see
Maybe
1 and 2.
Greenways.
I know
Yeah.
I know I stopped, but I didn't know everybody else did.
I don't know, you got a lot of grandkids.
I can't speak for them.
The one question I might have on that slide right there is, if we're looking at live birth data, why are we only projecting out 1 year? Can we not get 2024, 2025 data on that as well if we're looking at live births?
I do have that. I can.
Oh, you do?
provide that to you.
It would be nice to see, to project more than just the next year.
That's a good
It
point too,
doesn't look
David.
very pretty.
It's not gonna look pretty?
That's
Well,
what- yeah.
we need to know that.
Absolutely. That's a good point, because, and we went back and we made this mistake when we did that demographic study. That company told us to raise our ADM, 300 students, remember that, Bonnie?
Yeah, and we got shorted.
And we ended up less than we had. So what Susan does with projecting those by the grade or by the age grade is so much more effective than some company coming in here and saying, hey, this is gonna happen. And
I know.
I don't know if we went any further, but after that year, they lost me because they were so off.
Well, we lost money
Yeah.
because we projected so high, and then we didn't come in with it. So we got less from the state. So, you know,
We went
we
back to-
learned a lesson, and we
Absolutely.
paid them a good deal of money too.
Yeah,
But
went back to Penny's estimate.
When they had, their ranges were really far.
Oh.
I couldn't even understand how you could comfortably use their, without picking the midpoint.
Yeah, oh, no, it was, you know, that we went with what they gave us,
Yeah.
but that was God, that was a waste.
But so many of our big expenses, take for example Burton, when we need to know what's 5 years down the road enrollment wise, as opposed to just looking at the next year. I mean, for this immediate budget, yeah, next year is fine, but for some of these long-term decisions that we're required to make,
That's a good point, and, you know, some of our decision-making, you know, whether it's adding a position or what have you, if we're seeing that, okay, there's a precipitous drop forecast a year out, then we need to take that in consideration. Those
because
kinds
our
of things.
revenues are gonna drop total.
But I'd almost, to your point about BCAT, would say the opposite. You know, now the other, our schools,
right.
yeah, I get it, but to the point of BCAT, it makes it even more important. You know,
Yeah.
because we need those kids ready, the jobs ready, and
Because we're turning away kids.
yeah,
We don't have space.
right.
I'll get that information. I know I have it at least 3 years. And I know next year, we dropped below 13,000 on the grade progression. But VDOE has at still higher than 13,000. So we kind of reversed what they had. So
It's a great question, though.
Thank you.
I think one of the problems that we're gonna see with our internal numbers for the next couple of years is that big dip for the COVID. That's gonna affect our percentage going forward of survivorship. And so I think that, may have reduced our numbers below the 13,000 more than what, VDOE did. So.
For budget reasons, they're only gonna hold us harmless for so long with these COVID numbers, so we just need to know.
Actually, that's kind of already gone away.
It's already going away? Oh, lovely.
Is it really?
But
How do you know, I mean, how does that, have we been given some direction that that's?
we did get the caboose budget. I didn't want to tie y'all down in that at this meeting, because I already presented what I think our increase should be.
My only concern with that is that when that gravy train stops, we gotta go back to reality.
Well, what happened, that went away because they increased our sales tax and some other at-risk funding, POWs monies, that we're getting from other pots. And so in total, we're actually up about 1.8 million
Okay.
from what our budget is per them. So it didn't harm us, but it's interesting that they took away the no loss funding, even though our ADM is still lower. And I talked to some of the other directors, and they are facing the same thing. Salem has the same exact thing. Their ADM is down, but their no loss was taken away for the current year.
And that's on the state side,
That's the state side.
because the feds are the ones that's really been pumping in the money.
Correct.
Okay.
How long have we had that caboose budget?
They issue a caboose budget every year, and it comes
But-
out at the same time the governor's budget comes out.
Okay.
So, one thing that the governor's budget does every year, we are the first year of the biennium, you know, it comes out every 2 years, their budget does. And whenever the biennium changes, they do reassess our local composite index, which is the amount of wealth that our locality can afford to supplement our funds from the state. They looked at our local composite index, and basically it means they're changing those base years. So the last biennium, our base year was 2017 for the taxation information and the population information. It was 2018 for our average daily membership information. So with the biennium, what they do is they roll that forward, so those base years now become they go out and they're gonna pull the same data for 2019 and then 2020. So I've got up here the next year's and current year and the prior biennium, so 3 bienniums worth of what the local composite index is. I find it interesting. I just put some of our neighbors up there for comparison purposes. I find it interesting that we're the only locality that's going down this year. Infinitesimal, teeny amount, but we're going down a little bit. And we are kind of lower than some of our neighbors that I was a little shocked to see. So, but that's.
So we're losing a little bit of.
This means the state will give us more money.
Yeah, but overall, but then we gotta depend on the state where we're not getting it from elsewhere.
So what the state does is they calculate how much total revenue we need, and then they apply the local composite index and say, this amount should come from Roanoke County, and this amount is the cash we're gonna give.
That's what I'm saying, and I guess we could project Roanoke County with real estate increases because of the percentage that they've gone up for assessments. We could calculate how much more money will come in from the county, from the real estate, right? Because that's where most of our money, will come from, or that their money comes from.
I would not attempt to calculate anything until I go to all the revenue team meetings for the county.
Yeah, we will.
And I'll get that information.
I'm just thinking there's gonna be evidently some more money coming in with assessments.
Right.
Susan, you gave us this for a reason. And I'm trying to wrap my head around this component. Is the analogy because we did go down, is that the local, when you say the local composite, you're talking about just of the Roanoke County portion of revenue? Am I getting that correct?
Well,
versus what Montgomery County proportionate revenue would be?
What it basically means is the state calculates total revenue. And then they say, at a minimum, we're going to chop off this portion and your county should give you at least this. And we're going to give you this. So when our local composite index goes down, the state gives us more money.
It's the state's way of saying, this is what your locality should be able to contribute toward the school system. So they're actually saying that the local contribution has gone down slightly. Therefore, the state gives us more money to make up for it. Is kind of what the LCI kind of is a measure of what the locality should be able to do, not what they do. Does that make sense?
I'd be interested to know more about that. In no way that is part of the factor of the revenue sharing.
This has nothing to do with the revenue sharing.
So, is that a what am I trying to say? Is that a wealth indicator?
Kind of.
That's what this is, yes.
Yeah, kind of.
And so we're trending slightly down. And I don't want to say it's in a bad way, but kind of moving in the direction of, how do you say that? So that all plays into what we've been talking about. That's my point, I guess, is if I'm understanding what this means. Everybody else is trending up, and we're coming down, even slightly. Okay.
And it is interesting to compare localities.
Absolutely.
To your point, yeah.
It's amazing if you think about it.
That's just 1 year, or, well, no, you're looking at over 20.
I've got 3 years of the biennium.
I mean, that's a huge to me. I may ask you more questions about this later. I don't want to take our time now, but that's a huge indicator if I understand it correctly.
It'd be more of the useful information if it was a 10-year period, though.
Well, it's 6.
Because you have to see, well, even greater, because you see where Roanoke is, it's at the bottom, and then look at Salem, it's a little higher, so, they ended up close to the same data point as they were from 2019 to 2024. So, I don't know, I wouldn't know how to interpret that, but
That's why I made
It would be good to see the larger context.
Yes, that's what I'm
Yes.
saying, that might be considered in a
Right.
broad scheme of things, that, you know,
Mhm.
a snapshot, it might be better to have a bigger, broader view.
And I can get that, we have that number.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Very interesting.
Anything else?
No, ma'am?
So then we'll just get into, I'm not gonna touch it based on everything in the governor's budget, but we'll just, touch some of the hot topics. Obviously, the compensation supplement is always a hot topic for, the governor's budget. I have not, calculated the expense to us. However, just know, when they say 5%, they're only giving it to SOQ funded, instructional and support positions, and we have a support cap, and it's subject to LCI, and so the money that we get from the state is never enough to fund the full raise that we want to give to our employees.
That's on a biennial basis.
The way that he approved this one is he approved 5% in each year of the biennium, with the floor being 2.5%. So we would have to give at least 2.5% in the first year of the biennium in order to even qualify in the second year for at least a minimum of 2.5%. So if we only did a 1% this year, we would not qualify for their funding.
And again, just I want to drive home the point, because from a legislative standpoint, this is something that's a real issue for school divisions, and that support cap. So all of our instructional assistants and, even assistant principals, which we believe are necessary to run schools, and support instruction, they're falling under that artificial ceiling that was adopted back during Governor Kane's administration, and they never restored it. So that continues to cost us millions of dollars every year.
And that's 5%, so 2.5 each year,
That's support,
right?
support cap.
They're given 5% every year, and they will fund up to 5% every year. To
With
access the
match.
funds, we have to do between 2.5 and 5%.
And for us, that's 2.5 million, what is that?
I knew you were gonna ask that, and I did not look up the costs of it, anything.
It's a large.
I think in previous years, if I'm correct, remembering correctly, like a step is about $1.5 million, so.
Yeah, somewhere in that.
So,
range.
yeah, to get to 2.5, you've gotta,
Okay.
that's not a bad ballpark.
Yeah, okay.
And to complicate matters even more, with us giving the mid-year pay raise this year, I'm gonna have to reach out to the VDOE and find out, so is that over including a mid-year pay raise for some of our employees this year? Because that's,
Can you use
$1.6
that?
million we're gonna have to fund next year. So there's always a lot of tentacles to their compensation funding.
Wish I had left this part of the meeting.
But we accrued for that, right? I mean, we accrued for that amount. Yeah.
The next item is the VRS rates, and typically in a first year of a biennium, we are seeing the VRS rates go up. This year, the VRS actually lowered their rates. However, the VDOE did not accept the lower rate, and they're keeping us at the same VRS percentage of employer contribution as we were last year. This basically means no harm to us. It's the same. So typically in years, that can be, $750,000 required budget priority off the bat, and we're not going to face that. So that's a good thing. The governor did increase our at-risk funding for next year to the tune of $1.2 million. He increased it from 26% in FY22 to 49.5% in FY23 and 36% in FY24. This is very specific funding that when we get into actually budgeting, I will have to work with the directors and ensure that we use it for the exact purpose and we identify. This past year, when we had to submit our annual expenses to Virginia Department of Education, we had to line item lay out exactly who we were paying with at-risk or how we were spending these funds. And so they are holding us accountable for reporting those funds, and we will need to make sure that we kind of set those aside. So my point in saying this is just that is not free money to use for just any increase. Like that money could not go towards maybe textbooks, right? It would have to go towards at-risk needs. Similarly, the early reading intervention, they are expanding that program from K3 to K5, and so they're providing additional funds to expand that program here on site. They did go through re-benchmarking. This year, it is required, I think by code law, that they re-benchmark. And Dr. Nicely, I think I misspoke when I spoke
It's
over
okay,
you.
go ahead.
So this is where they take a look at support personnel costs, personnel transportation, and certain costs and data inputs. They look at it across the board for everybody, and this is just a re-benchmarking. I don't know the details. I've not gotten into the minutiae of their calculation or anything, but suffice it to say, they are holding us harmless to the tune of $1.27 million. And then, as you all are aware, we are facing one of the big revenue line items we have is sales tax, and with the governor taking away the grocery tax, first thing I think of is, oh no, there goes some of our money. So luckily, the governor has put in a hold harmless to make up for that, and that's looking to be about $395,000 for our school system. You know I'm doing my job way too often when I'm in the grocery store thinking.
There's a lot of other people that are thinking, yay.
And so then the last really big ticket item that just kind of floored me is they are putting forth this one-time grant. We will get $5.5 million for school construction, and it has to be used by the end of fiscal year 25. So I have it, they say you can use it on any kind of non-recurring construction, renovation, technology, and debt service costs. I have built this into our CIP to use it, and I've rearranged the CIP a little bit in order to spend this by this date. So we'll get into that in the near future.
What is this based on?
Maybe all these surpluses we're getting? Like where they're getting the money from, or
Yeah,
how
I
we're
mean,
getting
how
it?
did they base that Roanoke County would get $5.5 million versus?
They gave $1 million to everyone flat, and then they based the difference between $1 million, like the additional $4.5 million, is a weighted average based on our ADM percentage.
Weighted average, okay.
Can that be put toward a project that has already begun?
Or could it be put towards starting the 2 elementary schools that need to be?
Yeah, that's where she's going with the
That's
CIP
where I'm
update,
going.
yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, so hold on to that question, because I think that's something we'll have to talk about.
Okay,
That's actually a little piece of good news,
yeah.
get that money, yeah.
It's not gonna do a whole lot, but it'll help. I'll take everything I can. So then at the end of the day, this is where our revenues are looking. The first column on here, the way that I lay this governor's budget, and anytime I bring you the state revenue, the first column is the current year budget, and then I show the per pupil effect of that, and then the next column is the governor's budget and the per pupil, and then the final is our incremental change. And so as we're going through the budgeting process, now keep in mind the governor's budget is always higher than what comes at the end of the year, so this is the probably top of what we could imagine to see. But you'll see, we'll go through the differences here in a sec. The first row is our budgeted ADM. The second row is our composite index for the 2 years. Getting into the top group is our general operating fund, that big blue fund from the previous slide. You can see our sales tax numbers is increasing substantially, and so is just our basic SOQ excluding sales tax. The incentive is going up $1 million, and that is really related to that at-risk, is a good portion of that increase, and our hold harmless increases are part of that as well. Then we've got some categorical funds and some lottery funds in there. The lottery funds are going up a lot because of the other part of the at-risk funds. The at-risk funds are provided out of two different categories. They've split that. So then our total general fund increase that the governor is put forth is about $5.986 million. Move into the other funds, our instructional resources fund. We're looking to get $214,060 more next year. The technology replacement fund, just $12,440, so that's not a lot. The grant fund, the $637,236, that is a factor mostly of that PALS grant is what's driving that increase. And then I told you about with the moving up to the K5 instead of just K3 for the early reading. The $80,000 for school nutrition increase there slightly. And then the capital projects fund, we've got the $5.5 million going into that, and I will review that in our CIP. So in total, we're looking at maybe $12.4 million, so I'll take it. And keep my fingers crossed that it doesn't come down too much. So now we're going to go ahead and move into our long-term planning. The first is our instructional resources fund. This is a 7-year plan that we started last year in order to really ensure that the materials that our students have in their classes and are using are current and up to date as to the adoption cycle with the VDOE. And this is a little small up there, but you do have your sheets in front of you. So that when I am presenting these adoption plans, what you'll see in your binders, you'll typically have the adoption plan up top, and then you're going to see the funds down below. So they're facing each other. On your adoption plan, this is a 6-year plan. The first year does become our budget. The top half, since we are really kind of projecting our expenditures, kind of flip-flopped. We show what our needs are first, and then the second half is our funding sources, and then we show the fund balance that carries over from year to year. What you'll see, kind of the notable adoptions. Oh, dag. Well, I thought I was going to highlight this. So the science, we didn't have enough money to adopt science in total in 22 as we would have liked. So we split that up between 22 and 23. So that is the second half of the science adoption. Let's see if I'm still on my pen. And then the history adoption is here in 24. The mathematics adoption is in 25. And then our next big adoption will be in 28 with our English. So those are kind of the really big ticket items. But then you'll see we have certain annual licenses, subscriptions that we pay that are related to the textbook resources that we use. So as far as funding goes, then down here is the funding piece. We have state funding. We have a little bit of money from surplusing old textbooks. The second main source is that transfer from the general fund. And then the transfer from the student activity fund, basically that's just a little bit of funds in there for when students tear up their textbooks or don't bring them back. So those are just fees for loss or damage in materials. So one thing to note is this column right here in 2023 basically becomes this column right here for our budget. This is the same information, so I won't beleaguer you with it. You do have 3 prior actuals. Again, this is financial statements information, and so you have your revenues first, your expenditures, and your fund balance. Biggest to note for budgeting purpose is the 385,220 increase in the transfer from the general fund. That's actually probably our smallest increase that we're looking at for transfers. Any questions on the instructional resources? The plan itself? We have Mr. Riley and Ms. Hogan in here if y'all had any specific questions, or that's where y'all under the bus.
Think we're good?
All right. Speaking of buses, we'll move into our fleet fund next. This one is a 15-year plan that we follow to ensure that the maintenance on any one school vehicle does not get to the point where it costs more than just replacing the thing outright. This is a very busy replacement plan. So I'll kind of walk you through the structure of it first. We've got the item being replaced in the first column. Over here, we've got the estimated cost and the total number of replacements. Then we've got our 15 years going across the top. And then the first group is for buses. So we have 158 buses. And you can see they're spread out pretty well evenly across the years. So that really helps us to avoid those jumps and peaks and valleys in our funding needs. We have our other vehicles next. So we have 110 other school vehicles that are on the replacement schedule to keep them current and useful. And then we have cameras. So every time we purchase a school bus, it has the camera system in it, the 3-camera system. So you can see the driver down the aisle and back up the aisle, or out the door, I can't remember. So as you can imagine, we have our buses for 15 years. The cameras don't last that long. So we have to have a replacement in there to roll through new cameras as they expire. Our funding sources for our fleet replacement plan.
Excuse me.
Yes,
One of the, and of course nobody's, here, sorry. Are we doing anything about buses where they would, have the stop sign or the gate out, and where cars are going around or speeding around, stop school buses?
I'll refer that to Mr. Lowe.
Oh, there it is.
We do not have that program in place. We are looking into it though, Mr. Ray. Kathy and Jerry have, they've been to a conference or two about that, and they have a vendor that has given them a proposal. But that's all I know about it right at this minute.
Yeah, I know we've had some close calls, which is,
Right. And there are some grants out there that they're exploring as well to be able to get some pilot programs like that on some of the buses.
thank you.
Another quick, just comment real quick is just for historical purposes, this fleet replacement plan is relatively new. The bus transport replacement plan has been in place for, several years, but the other vehicles and so forth, up until really the last 2 or 3 years, that was never built into the budget to replace those in any sort of, methodical way. So this is a sort of a new entry into our process for planning purposes.
Right, that middle section is what Dr. Nice is talking about.
And most of these gas are not propane, because we can't do on the hills very good, right?
Buses most of them are diesel. We have the pilot program up at Glenver where we have 10 propane buses.
But you're right, we found that they don't do so well.
On the hills.
Right.
So our funding for this plan really, as you can see, the majority of it does come from the transfer from the general fund. So again, the first column is 23. We'll come to our financial statements, and you'll see 23 right here. And our projected increase is the 675. So we'll move into the technology replacement plan, which is a 6-year plan. And this includes building security, equipment leases for cameras, computers, all of the active boards, radios, radio licensing, networking, servers. If it's technologically inclined, it needs to be on this list, and it is on this list. So, if you may not remember, but the technology replacement plan that I had last year did not show us as having a good year this year. It showed us as having to need a lot more money to go into the transfer, and that is what we are seeing. So we are going to have to jump this transfer up quite a bit this year. So just a forewarning. But the different revenues that go into this fund are the state has a technology initiative fund for 726. As far as I know, it's always been 726, and hopefully it'll continue and always be 726. And that is a specific grant that goes towards network, server, and wireless. And so you'll never see those three added together be less than 726. It can be more, but it can't be less than, because that funds those line items. A new item last year was the state infrastructure and operation funds. This is an amount that we split between the general fund and the technology fund. We put 40% in this technology fund. It really helped us in a year when we stopped collecting laptop fees, because that was a big loss. And so being able to replace it with this money has really helped us. The E-rate comes through here. And again, that is directly related to our purchases of equipment. And so we get rebates back on what that technological purchases are. We sell our machines at the end of life. And so at the end of every equipment lease, it's easier for the vendor, for us just to have a company come in and degoss and clean up all of the laptops and take them away. And so we get to take ownership of that, and we get the funds for selling those. We have a teeny little EBS lease, a small amount for the student activity fund, again, just for damages to property. And then the biggest chunk is going to be coming from the general fund. And when I say biggest chunk, that is what we are looking to need next year in order to fund and have just a little bit left over to carry forward. Any questions?
Are you able to project the following year's budget? Will that decrease and normalize, I hope?
Not for, so if you look at it, we need 2.9. Next year we need 3.6. But then we can stay at 3.6.
Oh.
Once we get there.
So I have a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
The grants that we just received, the 268, I don't remember the number off the top of my head anymore, but where does that reflect in here, and when will it reflect?
So that is not part of this process, because they are outside.
Right.
And what we do is, anytime we have a grant that's not in the budget, we bring it to the school board and inform you of the grant and ask your permission to accept it, which is what Mr. Terry did today. And then we have some reserve funds set aside.
So that goes to reserve.
That we don't have to get the appropriation for if it's less than that reserve. So then your approval, and typically we will go through and provide information, and then it either goes to consent or review it in a work session, and then it goes to action the next. So typically you get to see it twice.
Yeah.
This was an unusual timeline with the holidays and just getting that information and knowing such tight deadlines. But so that is completely outside of this, because right now we're talking about 2023
Right.
money, and that money will have to be spent in 2022.
But that money eventually goes into reserve pot.
No, what we get, since it's a grant, what we get, we spend all of it. All our revenues, it's reimbursement basis. We have to spend it first, and then we get the money back, from them.
It basically allows us, I guess, to buy extra
That's
that
what
we've
I'm
not
thinking.
budgeted
Yeah,
for.
that's what I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like,
Yeah.
so now you've got a little added bonus.
Mhm.
Yeah, so some of the security items that may not already be on here, like some of the additional cameras,
Mhm.
aren't on here.
Right,
It's kind of, yeah, gravy.
gravy.
Right, any other questions on? This is the hard one to take. So finally, we get to the capital projects fund. And this one is super small, so I'm gonna try and see if I can't zoom in. There should be a way to zoom in there.
Just as a caveat, board members have been asking over the last week about our CIP, so the information I've sent out to you to draw your attention to was your adopted current CIP. What Susan's getting ready to go over is your proposed revision to the CIP.
Yeah, so this is an annual process as part of the budget, so we have the one that's adopted every year. We adopt the 2023 column as the budget, and then all of the out years really are used for planning and projecting. So, with this, let me see if I can go back out a little bit. With this one, a couple things to note. Our costs for the first 3 projects the first 2 projects, the cost did not change at all. The costs for Burton Center, Arts and Technology, increased significantly from last year's CIP because we changed the square footage from 150,000 square feet to 210,000 square feet. So that was a significant increase. And then for all of the out years, those include replacement costs, and you can see the percentage of the square footage that is new construction versus replacement costs. I put that on this schedule for your review. We, when Mr. Lowe and I got together and we're talking about how much we were spending for materials right now, we increased the replacement cost to get it more in line with what we think it should be right now based on what we're spending on other renovations. So the actual cost per square foot increased $30 per square foot. So you will see these costs have increased a little bit to take into consideration the current costs.
With the 81 million for Burton, we're looking at 2037. Might I ask, I don't know if this, whatever the will of the board would be, there's no way we absorb that, right? I mean, we can't do that with our money. Would we be better off, just so it's more realistic to the capital improvement plan, to take that piece out of our budget, knowing we're gonna there's something gotta happen to make that piece happen? I mean, obviously it's gotta be done, don't get me, I'm pushing, as hard as I can that we start next year, just like we've always been doing. But my point is, we can't absorb 80 million in it's almost unrealistic to even produce this piece of paper. I know what you're saying and doing, but I'm just saying, for us, and what we're thinking, it's almost just makes this a piece of pie in the sky, piece of paper.
Your point's a good one. If I may just start responding, this is certainly for board discussion, and I certainly hear where you're going with that and understand it. If you recall, prior to the revamp of the CIP that we did a couple of years ago in 2019, when we kind of studied to reprioritize, BCAT was not even on the list.
No.
It was not even, and I think that, who knows?
We've got it there. We've got it there.
Right. So, and who knows what the reasons were for that in terms of what, previous boards were thinking and so forth. And, I don't know the answer to that, but, so I think, my view would be that I think that by getting it on the list has helped to make it a priority and get it as part of a discussion. So I'd kind of throw that out there. I'd hate for it to get on, be put aside and not happen because it's
No,
not
no,
on our
no,
list. But I also know your point is, look, it's gotta be funded
It's
by
absolutely-
something else.
That's
And so
right.
I don't know what
We
what that is,
can't
but.
do it at this
Right,
point.
that's
That's
right.
my only point.
That's right.
No, this, I mean, I get it. You know, the number, we knew the 50 was probably low, but we got to put something in there. And, you know, if we're waiting 30 years to start the rest of it, we can leave that in. But we know, and that's our point, this is economic development, is the way we have to look at it. I mean, we can leave it there, but, I mean, Northside Middle, we can start in 2041. I mean, that's great. 20 years from now, we'll get started on, I mean, all I'm saying is it's a tool, let's make it useful. We obviously can't absorb that, and if they want to leave us with what we've got, you know, then that's what we got. But, you know, we're going to fight tooth and nail, and those discussions are coming to make this happen. So, but for us to realistically, I mean, this just doesn't even make it a realistic document.
Where would we put it as a line item if we didn't have anything?
Well, what I was gonna recommend, if we wanted to keep it on here, we could just set it aside with a funding source of TBD, to be determined. We don't know what the funding source is, but we know we need something.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So, I mean, we could dump it over a couple of years with that, or we could dump it in 1 year and then really like exclude that from all of the other funding, and we can not necessarily put that at the bottom, but it would be by itself
Yeah,
in a column,
I'm good with that.
and we
If
can
everybody
schedule
else
out
is.
all the rest.
I just, I remember when I first came on the board, Michael, remember this, we took a 10-year CIP over to the Board of Supervisors with one project on it. This, to me, taking this 10-year CIP over with a 35-year project is, it's as unrealistic as that when we took over then. So, that's all, that's my only comment, if we can just adjust the timelines and have an extra source of, leave it on there, but we got to figure out another way to fund it or whatever.
And we're still 12, so I mean, it's
Yeah.
still how do you, that's
Unless we're
another
going to
discussion.
25. That ain't happening.
And just to bring into focus, that year of 2041, you mentioned Northside Middle School, it was built, I think, in 1969. You're talking about a 70-year-old building at that point, and it's another one that needs to be
It
done now.
needs to be done now,
That's
that's
right.
right. Hidden Valley Middle
Mhm.
needs to be done now. But anyway, all right.
One thing I did put on here, sorry, I'm gonna zoom into, no. Zoom in up at the top corner. So I did make a little change from what you saw last year. We scheduled out William E. Cundiff or W. E. Cundiff and Glen Cove pretty much exactly the same. So that half the funds went to one, half the funds went to the other, all the way through. With the additional $5.5 million from the state, we put it all straight to W. E. Cundiff, and we chunked as much money in as possible. So in 2025, we would have the funding, and I've spoken with Mr. Lowe, that as soon as that July 1st comes and we have that funding, we can roll forward with getting engaged and using that 5.5 from the state to complete that part of that project. So that 5.5 is included in the 6.9 million right here from the state. So the reverse of that is where they were both set to be started in 2027, and the last reiteration of the CIP, now Glen Cove gets pushed out to 2028 because we didn't split the funding.
Was
Look,
there a reason?
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Was there a reason we chose Cundiff over Glen Cove?
You could change them. I think that's just how they were listed originally, and the only reason that I could think of to keep it that way would just be tackle the larger school first, but certainly that's a decision the board can make however you want, but.
But let me say, I would love to say, hey, that's awesome, let's go with it, but the reality is, they are both open concept, and they both, in my mind, again, I don't know, I think y'all feel the same way, because the committee did the priority list of how these go. I think they both need to be fixed immediately.
Right, absolutely. And the only reason, she was proposing to, instead of doing it even, to do it like that would be to take advantage of that new 5.5 million.
No, I'm with you, but I think we gotta pull this other one up too.
And we learned lessons from Penn Forest. But that's not ideal. Kids are going through classes to get to other classes and disrupting the whole time.
We've already heard, just put up walls.
Yeah,
Just
put up walls,
Yeah.
yeah. And you got all that electrical equipment in the back, which is, about $500,000 to move or more. So I mean, think about these as we go to these projects, that we don't make these same mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the good thing is we get to Penn Forest in 2049, so.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they're right around the corner.
We expect to see all of you at the ribbon cutting.
Yeah. I'll send one of the grandkids.
In spirit or in real?
I'll be pushing up daisies, but.
Well, personally, I should be retired by the time we can do BCAT if we stick with this schedule.
David's in good health, we'll send him.
Brent's the baby.
Yes,
Oh,
he
that's
is.
right, Brent's a baby.
I hope I can
Brent,
make
you
it
gotta
to
rep-
49.
Hey,
I'll be 69 at that point.
you gonna represent us.
Wow.
You go there and say good things
Just a
about
pup.
us in 49. That's
So
a
as
good
part of
point,
our-
Cheryl.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. As part of our CIP, the big ticket item here that we need to fund from the general fund is that capital maintenance plan. If you recall, that is part of the county ordinance and policy and procedures, and it's part of our policy and procedure that every year we put $1 million towards the CMP. And so the next slide shows our CMP projects, the million, how we would spend it for the next 10 years. I don't think there's anything shocking on this list. You will see we did add, Mr. Lowe did add the scoreboards on here to help out our schools. We've got playground equipment on here. I think those are the two big items that we've talked about recently. So with that, we'll move into the budget priorities.
I tell you what, I'm thinking about writing up some kind of little biography so Brent has something to read. I don't know if I trust him to say something good about him.
Come on, man.
I'll be there. I'll make
You'll help, you'll
I don't want you to come back and haunt me, so.
So this first slide, the top half shows the transfers, the Instructional Resources Fund, the fleet, the technology, and the CMP. So it looks like, if we kept the plans as they are and made them whole, we would need almost $3.8 million to transfer into those other funds, with the biggest ticket item being the technology replacement fund. Now, of course, that 5.5 million that we put into CIP, we could put into some of these one-time deals, but I didn't recommend that at this point because we're trying to recover from all of our deferrals with COVID, and if we can just get these back into our baseline budget, I think that would behoove the school system. The next group of items really are items that are probably familiar with you because we have either adopted an additional cost in the current year with funds that we have available now with the expectation that we would need to build it into our original budget going forward. So the biggest ticket item was what I just presented to you guys with the mid-year pay plan adjustments. So I scheduled that out was about 1.8 million to continue that pay plan as it has been restructured and approved. I think Mr. Bradshaw brought forth a request to fund assistant coaches for softball, baseball, boys and girls soccer, and lacrosse. So that would, to get that into his recurring budget, would be $52,210. To get a coach for esports would be $10,765. To increase the remediation tutors PALs from $20 to $25. If you recall, we are funding that currently through the COVID grants, through the ESSER 2 and 3 grants. However, at some point, that is going to go away, and we will need to build that into our baseline budget, so I did want to get it on the priority list. It may not be one that we end up doing this year because we have other funding for the next foreseeable future, but we do need to keep that in the back of our mind as something we will need. The stadium field maintenance, including the mowing, that Mr. Lowe presented to you guys recently. I just chose the cheapest option. If that's not what you desire, we can put whichever option you want up here. But it seemed like that was something y'all wanted to move forward with, and if we do that, we need to get that built into our baseline budget.
We need to make sure that includes the aligning of the Northside High School Stadium. Agreed we would do that with the Bermuda.
Make a note to check.
Susan, that's 5 coaches for esports, by the way, not just one.
Yeah, I have that paused. I just didn't put the number.
That's okay.
I was running out of space.
I was thinking he was going to be
Thank
the
you for
highest paid
clarifying.
coach
I
we
just
had.
pulled up my presentation.
It's like, I coached at one time, I wasn't getting paid $10,000.
And I also added FICA too, so.
Yes, thank you.
You know I always add that part.
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. And then the last item on this list that we've looked at this year is a special education recruitment and retention stipend. We did fund that in the current year and paid for that through the ESSER 3 grant, which was approved by the school board back in August. And we went ahead and paid that this year. However, it is staff's desire and recommendation to continue that in order to attract and retain quality employees for this special ed.
So that would become an annual expense.
For the foreseeable future, because it is a very hard to fill position at this point.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Ms.
So,
Shawnee.
in regards to the assistant coaches for softball, baseball, boys and girls soccer, lacrosse, we don't have a funding for that right now, is that correct?
Mr. Bradshaw?
Yeah, what we do, but this was adding in additional ones to what we already have, and the board recommended that, they asked me to do a study to see how many coaches the neighborhoods around, the districts around us had.
That's right.
And we were short, like, I think we had 1 assistant softball coach, and now we have 2 assistant softball coaches with this plan. So it just adds an additional one, and that's the dollar figure to add those additional ones only.
Okay, like for tennis, I just know from my own personal
Right,
history.
and I have.
Like tennis doesn't have an assistant coach, so typically what we do as parents is we pitch in.
Right,
And we
these were
don't,
just, I'm sorry.
that's just to make a salary a decent salary, in fact.
These were just the coaches that was asked.
That was asked
To be, yes.
for you too, okay. And then this esports, I know this is kind of a new and upcoming thing, $10,000?
It's for 5 coaches, $2,000 per coach.
Oh, is that what you were saying before?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, is that an esports coach at each school?
Each high school.
Each high school?
And again, that was requested.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Greenwood.
so the 1.8 continuation of mid-year pay plan, should we not just include that in the human resource piece for payroll? And, I mean, I'm assuming we're not gonna take that away, right?
It will be, but it's it will
Are you
affect the
just
bottom
saying
line.
it's an increase to the?
Right.
To
Yeah.
the budget, okay.
Increase over this year.
This isn't gonna be, I just didn't want, this is not gonna be a continual line item.
No, this will be to actually
Put
get it
in.
part of the original budget.
That's right,
itself.
okay.
And that $8 million per month, correct? Is that about right, Jim? $8 million per month that we're paying in salaries?
That sounds about right. I would have to look it up.
I think
to be
that's,
honest with you. I think it's 112 million for the year,
yeah, I think that's what it was.
so maybe 110 million. So yes, it's something along those lines.
So
That's correct, Mr. Wright.
all right, thank you.
And just to remind everybody, that mid-year pay plan adjustment that we're putting in place now in January, that was for, increasing our IA rate. Was nutrition included in that, a couple others, so.
It was.
Yeah,
And a few other on the same.
yeah.
grade.
24.
And to answer your question, I will roll that figure in when we present the entire package.
Okay.
Yes. Because you're right, we don't want to take that back away, because that would
Right.
defeat the purpose of putting it in there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously wages aren't going backwards, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. So then I wanted to just go back and revisit our unfunded priorities from last year. We had 4.6 million. The first 2.3 million, and I've got the details following. So this is just a summary about the department. I'll just go ahead and move to it. So that first 2.3 million all relates to transfers. So really, if we do what was on the prior schedule, we don't need this, right? It's kind of, they're the same thing. But I wanted to present this as it purely was presented as the unfunded amount from last year, or the current year. Then, going through the departments, the administration department had asked for an increase in the administration allotment and in the athletic allotment to help out the schools, and additional licenses for Edgenuity for our ASTEP program. Currently, we're able to fund that through some of the ESSER grants, but at some point we may need, and that's a very successful program, we may need to build that into our operating budget. Moving on into instruction, those departments asked for library media databases at the elementary schools, interpreters at both levels, art materials, an additional student per academy at the governor's school to pay the tuition, and then the math supervisor contract, which we absorbed that this year. So we probably can absorb that as we build out compensation.
And just to be clear, these are previous year's requests. We're not representing these as must-do kind of items, but they are requests.
In the finance department, we just had that turf replacement set aside for Glenboro High School of the $40,000. Knowing that we have an MOU from the county to for all of the turf, that is probably one that will rise higher, and we'll get that tackled this year with the county's help, because we will want to match whatever. I can't remember what the MOU said. We definitely want to match that. Moving into the Human Resources Department, the increase in the part-time nurse pay rate, some of these pay rates we've funded currently through the COVID grants. However, at some point, that money will go away, and we will have a fiscal cliff in front of us of a large amount of money. So as we can start to slowly pull some operating funds to cover these, that would be the best way to avoid that cliff at the end of the grant. So that would include the substitute pay rate for the teachers and the IAs as well, which is more than the $10. That was just what was presented during the budget last year. But we have increased that quite substantially. The other thing that was on the priority list that is a priority, you know, last year we were able to return full-time benefits to our bus drivers and bus aides. I know that we brought Ms. Huffman in here, and they are just struggling trying to attract her cafeteria associates. And so, I really think that we should take a hard look at funding this next year, restoring the benefits to the nutrition associates. I do think with the increase in the pay rate for them as well, this may not be something they can self-fund. This may be something that you'll want to consider as being another transfer out of the general fund into the nutrition fund. And we may can even discuss looking at transfers out of the health insurance fund just to get it kick-started if that's what we would need to do. But that might help her attract better employees who will stay with us. Moving into the technology, the digital radio replacement, that's actually, we've already covered that in the tech replacement fund, and so that TBD is already kind of covered, so that's duplicative. But this, again, just to reiterate what was not funded that was on the list last year. The 2 IT positions and 3 ITRT positions. Moving into facilities and operations, they do have the zoning positions, although I think Mr. Lowe has had some considerations of maybe a different way to look at that, and how to get enough individuals in his areas as well. So we've got some safety equipment up there and some preventive and maintenance vendor contracts up there under maintenance as well. Moving into transportation, gas prices going up, other general increases in our budget, increasing positions from where they are as a trade to technicians, changing administrative assistant from a 210 to a 260, and then hiring another 210, or some that we looked at last year. Then the utility costs are rising, so we wanted to get a little bit added to the utility budget. School counseling, all of those positions, we went ahead and put into one of the Easter grants. So we would not need that now because they're funded through the next year. However, again, that's one that we're going to want to pull into the budget to continue with the school counseling. The special education behavioral position degree supplements and albuterol. Interestingly enough, the VDOE actually gave us, the state gave us money in the current year, about $1,600 to kickstart the albuterol. They did it kind of after the fact, and so I don't know if you recall, earlier this year, Ms. Harmon did bring to your request for that budget, and we have received the money, and they were able to fund it. But again, that was outside of the budget process and not part of the original budget, so we would want to get that pulled into the original budget. And then we've got $13,606 in CTE equipment. So that's a lot of help. So our remaining timeline is up here for you. We'll meet again for a budget work session on February 1st. When we do meet again, we will cover compensation and benefits. So we'll look at the salary scales and insurance and all that, and how we can fund the largest amount of pay increase we can possibly squeeze out. Any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Peterson?
Just thinking about, so will we move the next work session to the 18th with our board meeting? Or isn't that what, the 13th, am I wrong on that? I might be, let's see.
Like the next work session is scheduled for February 1st. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so
Oh,
on the
okay. I'm
13th,
sorry,
we
I was
would
looking at the-
just approve the final CIP.
Okay, so the next one's February 1st.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
Same.
but where she has the 13th on there for school board meeting, that's now the 18th.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
yeah.
I was looking at the next block. Okay.
And the final CIP is fine on the 18th, correct?
Um,
Do you need it before then?
let me double check with the county.
do you also present, while he's, that's a question, are you also presenting for the pay increases for the non-instructional staff? Or have you already done that?
I will have to present at the Board of Supervisors for our other fund carryover.
Okay.
And
So is
then
that-
they're gonna do the second reading for the pay increase. So I'll need to be in the Board of Supervisors meeting at 3 for both of those items.
On Tuesday, this Tuesday?
That's Tuesday.
Yeah, on the 11th.
Okay, so we're doing that as a part of that.
And then our joint meeting starts at 5.
Oh, I got, that's right, they're meeting before
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. A lot of information to digest right there. All right, item number 4.06, the discussion of making masks optional. I know it's a hot topic around the country and in different parts of the state, and with the governor, or the change in leadership in Richmond, I know we wanted to just have a discussion today about what this board may be thinking if the mandate is lifted. So, Ms. Fashani, did you want to start?
Yeah, if I may, I'd first like to say that, you know, it's an honor to be here today, to be elected, and it's a privilege to serve. And I'm surrounded by great people, and I'm looking forward to what we can do together in the future. 2022 is going to be a great year, a lot better than the last couple of years, for sure. So I'd like to take us back in time to March 2019, when COVID arrived on our doorsteps, and the whole world turned upside down. We were told we needed 2 weeks to slow the spread, and here at Roanoke County Public Schools, we obliged and we pivoted and we did our very best. You know, first we were told to mask, and then we were told double mask, no mask. If you get vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask. And then the goalposts moved quite a bit, and then we were told to put our masks back on. If you went into a restaurant over the summer, you could walk into a restaurant, you have your mask on, you sit down, you could take your mask off because COVID magically disappeared when you were sitting down. And I'm sure you remember churches were closed, but you know, bars were open. So it's been a little chaotic. We had a great summer, and then HB 1303 came into play, and it seemed like a great piece of legislation. I still think it was meant to keep our kids in school 5 days a week, and I think that was great, and in-person learning. But it became apparent that Dr. Oliver, with the VDH and Mr. Northam, they inserted their interpretation of HB 1303, making it a public health order, and things kind of changed. Everybody was really surprised that that was put into place. So to be clear, the CDC is not a fourth branch of government. We have 3 branches of government. If we go back to our 8th grade civics class, legislative, executive, and judicial, and the CDC is actually a 501(c)(3). If you peeked into many of our classrooms this past semester, I can say from my own experience, the masks that were being worn were not being worn how the medical field typically wears masks. I've worked in hospitals for many years, and I can tell you I never wore my mask under my nose, I never wore my mask under my chin, I never wore my mask on my elbow, and I sure would never take my mask and put it in my pocket and then put it back on my face. I would also never pull down my mask to talk to somebody, and I would never pull down my mask to sneeze. And I think we've all seen this taking place. The psychological damage that we've seen our students go through and our children these past 2 years is really, truly beyond our comprehension at this point. We have a worldwide epidemic of suicides that's irrefutable, and we have a huge surge in drug abuse among our adolescents. A recent study came out of Brown University, and it's actually a really good one. If you haven't looked at it, you should. And it demonstrates a demonstrable drop in IQ of 21, 23 points. And they're attributing this to the result of masking and in daycares and schools. Brown University is not a university that anybody should sneeze at. We have passionate people on both sides of the aisle. We've got people that, parents that want to mask their children. And then we've got parents that don't. I support each one of the parents that want to mask and those that don't. If you want to mask, you should be able to mask. And in fact, you can wear as many masks as you want. If you want to wear a KN95 or an N95 or just a surgical mask, you know, I'm not going to say that's up to you. But if you don't, you shouldn't have to. One person should not be able to choose for the next person. I don't think anyone should take away anyone's right to mask, nor I believe that any one person should take away someone's right not to mask. So if you go to the Code of Virginia, 1-240.1, rights of parents, this is what it is, and I quote, "A parent has the fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child." I'll read that again, 1-240.1. A parent has a fundamental right to make decisions concerning the upbringing, education, and care of the parent's child. Now, November 2nd, 2021, was a big day for the state of Virginia. The people spoke. Governor Youngkin was elected. And that's because parents believe they absolutely have a stake and they're stakeholders in their children's education and that they should have a choice. January 15th, just coming up around the corner, 2022, Youngkin and his administration will take office. And his administration has made it very clear. He plans to give the control back to the localities. That's your local school boards. And he will appoint a new Virginia Health Commissioner. That's essentially your VDH guy. So today, I would like to make a motion, and my motion would be this, and is this: upon Governor-elect Youngkin's administration's canceling of the current VDH public health order, Roanoke County Public Schools will immediately become mask optional and return to pre-COVID medical policies, leaving medical decisions such as testing, quarantining, and contact tracing between the doctor and their student patient and students' parents and guardians. I should also state that federal law, you had it up there earlier, Rhonda, still will require teachers and staff to mask, because that's federal law versus state law, and also masking will be required on school buses and transportation. But just before anybody gets too upset about that, Virginia is a medical and religious exemption state. So that would mean that staff could file a medical or religious exemption form if they wish. So I'll read my motion one more time. Upon Governor-elect Youngkin's administration's canceling of the current VDH public health order, Roanoke County Public Schools will immediately become mask optional and return to pre-COVID medical policies, leaving medical decisions such as testing, quarantining, contact tracing between the doctor and the student patient or the student's parent and guardian. Do I have a second for the motion?
Any discussion?
You need a second first.
We need a second?
Yeah, I'll second the motion. I think that thus far we've relied on the state's guidance, and if their guidance changes, I think that we need to change as well.
And now we can have discussion.
Now we can have discussion.
Mr. Greenway?
So I may have misunderstood this, but I thought we were moving the meeting to the 18th to vote on this. Did I misunderstand that?
It can become an action item on the agenda for the 18th.
It'll become an action item for the 18th. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, well, then that discussion that we had, I guess I just want to know, I didn't understand that then. You need to, so you're asking to vote it right now.
I was thinking that we would have some citizen input. We'd be able to talk to legal counsel and ask some questions, and then have the vote, like you were thinking.
Well, I'm honestly let's just be honest. You know, once the governor states what he states and gives it back to us, obviously I've been mask, optional from the beginning. I just think we're that close to the goalpost to let him speak, and then we voted in. That's why I thought you moved the meeting. That's what we discussed. But I'm just one person.
It would be, I do think it would be obviously helpful to get as much input as we can and legal input from our council, but I think everybody probably knows where I stand on this as well. And if people want to wear a mask, great. If they want to wear 2 masks, fantastic. If they, and encourage people to do that if that's what they want, but
See, my thought
typically.
was if we could, we know on good authority that Governor-elect Youngkin, January 15th is inaugurated, and he will more than likely make a statement. If you pay attention, you watch his inauguration, he'll write an executive order which cancels out HB 1303.
And
It
at
will
that
not be a
point,
legal issue. Right, so this motion is when and if he does that, effective of that, we would move forward, so that we don't have to come back for another meeting, so that we don't have to.
But we're gonna meet anyway.
And, yeah, we're gonna meet anyway, and that would, what if he delayed it, you know?
He's not gonna delay it, but that,
I
if he
mean,
does
well, he
delay it,
could.
Mike, if he does delay it, it's delayed as well, because it's tied to him. It's tied to him. This gives parents, this gives people time, this gives us time to put together Q&A information, this gives people time to prepare.
But I was thinking, like Tim was thinking, that we would do the action on that night where we would have
Yeah,
we would have
that's-
citizen input, we would have information that we could ask our attorney and try
Yeah,
to.
if we were at the beginning of August like we were, I get it. I still think that way, but we're at the finish line. That's my only consideration, is that we're there, we let the governor, you know,
But
do
what's
it.
the difference if you have the motion that coincides with him saying it? That's what the motion is.
Well, as long as we vote on it Tuesday, the 18th. I mean, now, if you vote tonight, I mean.
What's the
It-
difference?
It would already be done, right?
I think you get the cover of the governor on that date.
Well, if the governor doesn't make it
Again,
official.
if we
That would
were
be
6
prior to us
months,
getting
we're only 2
anything
weeks,
from
or a
legal
week and
or
a half.
letting citizens come too.
Well, the citizens been talking for a long time. I
Yeah.
don't think that we're gonna get a difference in opinion on either side, on the citizen part.
I just feel the opportunity to give them, and that we're doing something in a work session when we're not even giving them an opportunity for citizens, whichever way, I'm not saying whichever way they go, but I'm just saying, give them the opportunity.
And I've been beat down on this for 2 years, so I get, it's not, a movement away, it's a movement of just, what's a week and a half. But, by the same token, to Mike's point, transparent, it's not gonna change anything, right? I think from my constituents, I know where they stand. But, giving them the opportunity and transparency, the opportunity to speak is, they're gonna speak either way on that meeting night, right? So, yeah, I come back, I'll look to you, you're the chairman, so, and I don't mean that, but I thought that was already worked out, through what we had.
Well,
messaged. So I hadn't spoke to y'all.
The 18th, if he does make that effective on the 15th, the 18th, we're looking at one school day of masking or unmasking, being that the 18th that day, before we meet that night. Is it worth, I think we know what the decision will probably be come the 18th. Whether or not, because of Omicron and the surge in cases, I don't anticipate the new governor backtracking on that. I suppose it's possible. And it could be the 31st of the month, or it could be sometime in February before he removes that. I doubt that's gonna be the case.
I doubt it either, but I am cynical with politicians. Y'all know that. Y'all know.
If he did not rescind, you just go to any reports, he says he's doing it. So why not let the people know that this is what we're doing, or we will be mask optional, this is what he wants to give the power back to the people. This is what he said from the very beginning. So we know it's gonna happen. And the question, if you wanna say the question is when, it's gonna be 1:15, should be 1:15. I have that on pretty good authority.
And I agree. I don't doubt you. I have no reason to doubt you.
So if we're gonna do it anyway, much to the chagrin of 10% of the population probably.
From a legal standpoint, what kind of hurdles might you see?
Yeah, well, and I'm not your attorney, I'll say that. But I would say, just, by way of observation, in terms of what I heard the motion to be in the discussion, you've got two things at play, just as a reminder. You've got the public health order, which is one thing, which is just about masking. And then you've got the state law, which is Senate Bill 1303, which requires school boards to adhere to CDC guidelines. So I heard the motion being when he repeals the public health order, but then I also heard something about if he repeals 1303. So I think you need to clarify that because all of this also calls into question the quarantining and everything else. So I think you need to be clear in terms of what you're talking about.
Let me make it real clear. I'm gonna put it back to you guys. I'm gonna vote no today, but I'll vote yes Tuesday, the 18th. That's just where I'm at. We're that close to the finish line. Let's cross it.
Again, the motion is to coincide with what the governor does.
Any other? All right,
Motion, you got a second?
Madam Clerk, the roll?
Mr. Greenway,
No.
Mr. Shawnee,
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
No.
Mr. Hudson,
Yes.
Mr. Linder.
Yes. All right. I don't believe there's anything else on the agenda. We've got a meeting next Tuesday with the Board of Supervisors at 5 o'clock. So until then, meeting adjourned.